Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I noticed it because it stopped exactly when I did. I was walking home late, just after midnight, taking the usual route through a long stretch of road that runs between a small park on one side and a row of houses set back behind low fences on the other. It's not a busy area at that time. A couple of streetlights spaced out and a path that cuts through the park if you want to save a few minutes. I stuck to the road that night. It was cold, dry, no wind. One of those nights where the air feels still enough that your footsteps sound louder than they should. I had my hands in my pockets, just walking at a steady pace, not really paying attention to much. That's when I heard it. A tone. Soft. Steady. High enough that it sat just above the usual background noise. Not sharp or piercing. Just there. I didn't stop right away. At first, I thought it was something in the distance. Maybe machinery or a faint alarm somewhere. But as I kept walking, I realized something. It was matching my movement. Not in rhythm, exactly. But it seemed tied to it. Every step I took, the tone stayed consistent. I slowed slightly. The tone didn't change. I took a few more steps, still there. Then I stopped. The tone cut out instantly. No fade, no delay, just gone. I stood there for a second, listening. Nothing. Just the quiet of the street. I took a step forward. The tone came back. Same pitch, same volume, like it had been switched on again. I stopped. It disappeared. I stayed still for a few seconds. Nothing. I moved again. It returned. That's when I started to pay attention properly. I looked up. The sky was clear, a few stars visible between the streetlights. Nothing unusual. No visible source. I turned slowly in place, trying to figure out if it was coming from a specific direction. But when I stood still, there was nothing. No tone at all. I started walking again. The sound came back immediately. Soft, steady, hovering somewhere above me. I couldn't tell how high. It didn't echo, didn't bounce. Just sat there. I walked a few more steps, then stopped suddenly. It cut out again, exactly the same way. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like when you change altitude quickly. I swallowed. The pressure stayed. I looked around. No one else on the street, no cars passing, no open windows, nothing that would explain it. I started walking again. The tone returned. I paid closer attention this time. It wasn't perfectly steady. It rose and fell slightly, not in a pattern I could follow, just a gentle shift in pitch, almost like it was adjusting. I kept walking. The sound stayed with me. Then I slowed my pace, not stopping completely, just walking slower. The tone didn't change. Same volume, same pitch movement. I stopped again. It vanished. I waited longer this time, 10 seconds, maybe more. Nothing. I took a step forward. It came back. Instant. I felt that drop in my stomach then. Not panic, just that quiet realization that something wasn't right. I looked up again, still nothing visible. I stepped off the pavement slightly onto the edge of the park. The ground changed under my feet. Grass instead of concrete. I took a few steps. The tone stayed. I stopped. It disappeared. I stepped back onto the pavement, started walking again. The tone returned. It didn't seem tied to the surface, just to my movement. I kept going, trying to ignore it, but it was hard to ignore. Once you notice something like that, you can't unhear it. I walked faster. The tone stayed the same, didn't get louder, didn't change speed, just followed. I stopped again abruptly. It cut out. I stood there, breathing a bit heavier now. The pressure in my ears had increased slightly. I swallowed again. No change. I looked up at the nearest streetlight. It buzzed faintly, like they always do. Normal. Not the same sound. I started walking again. The tone returned, same as before. I was halfway down the road now. The houses on the side looked dark. No movement, no sign anyone else was around. I kept walking. The tone stayed with me. Then I tried something. I slowed down to almost a standstill, barely moving. The tone stayed. As long as I was moving, even slightly. The moment I stopped completely, gone. I tested it a few more times. Same result. I felt like I was being followed, not physically. But something was keeping pace with me, above me, just out of sight. I didn't look up again, didn't want to. I just kept walking, faster now. The tone stayed, unchanged, until I reached the end of the road, turned the corner onto my street, and for a second it lagged, just slightly. like it didn't follow immediately. Then it was gone. I stopped. Nothing. No tone, no pressure in my ears. Everything felt normal again. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. I walked the rest of the way home. No sound, no change. I checked the time when I got inside. 12:37. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed. I went to bed after that. Didn't sleep much. The next night I took the same route, same time. I slowed down as I reached that stretch, listened carefully. Nothing, no tone. Everything normal. But now when I walk home late, I catch myself stopping every so often, just to see if the silence cuts in exactly when I do. I noticed it because the ceiling didn't usually have shadows. I was lying on my back, just trying to fall asleep. It was one of those nights where you're tired but your mind won't settle, so you end up staring at the same spot for too long. The room was dim, not completely dark. There's a street light outside that leaks a bit of light through the curtains, enough that you can see the outline of things without turning anything on. My ceiling is plain. No fixtures in the middle, just a flat surface with a faint patch of light from the window. That's why it stood out when I saw something change. At first, I thought it was my eyes adjusting, a darker area forming near the center of the ceiling. Subtle, barely there. I blinked a couple of times, looked away, then back. It was still there. A faint circular shadow, not sharp, not like something blocking a direct light source. More like a soft, darker patch. I stayed still watching it, trying to figure out what could be causing it. There's nothing hanging from the ceiling. No fan, no light fixture. Nothing that would cast a shadow like that. I shifted slightly on the bed. The shadow didn't move, didn't change shape, just stayed there, centered above me. I frowned and pushed myself up onto one elbow. The angle changed slightly, but the shadow stayed fixed to the same spot on the ceiling. That's when I felt that quiet unease. I sat up fully, looked around the room. Everything else looked normal. The wardrobe, the door, the chair in the corner, nothing out of place. I looked back up. The shadow was still there, same size, same shape. I checked the window. The curtains were closed, but not completely tight. The light coming through looked the same as it always did. I couldn't see anything outside that would cause that shape. No movement, no passing cars. I lay back down slowly, kept my eyes on the ceiling. The shadow didn't change. I reached over and checked my phone. 1:36 a.m. I remember that clearly. I put it back down, looked up again. That's when I noticed it was shrinking slowly, not fading, just getting smaller. The edges stayed soft. The darkness stayed the same, but the circle was tightening in on itself. I stayed completely still, watching it. The movement was steady, not jerky, not uneven, just gradual. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like a shift in air. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I kept watching. The shadow got smaller and smaller, still centered in the same spot. It didn't drift, didn't move across the ceiling, just reduced in size. I sat up again, leaning forward slightly, trying to get a better look. The shadow kept shrinking. The pressure in my ears increased slightly, not painful, just noticeable. The room felt quieter, not silent, just reduced, like the usual background noise had dropped. I looked around again. Nothing else had changed. I looked back up. The shadow was now maybe half the size it had been, still perfectly circular, still soft-edged. I stood up from the bed. The floor felt colder than usual. I took a step forward, directly under where it had been. Looked up. The shadow didn't react, didn't change. It just kept shrinking. I raised my hand slightly, like I was going to touch it, but it was too high. I let my hand drop. The shadow continued to reduce until it was just a small, dark spot. Barely noticeable now. I held my breath without realizing. Then it was gone. No fade, no transition, just gone. The ceiling returned to how it always looked. Flat, evenly lit. Nothing out of place. The pressure in my ears eased almost immediately. The quiet lifted. The normal background noise came back. I stood there for a few seconds, just looking at the spot where it had been. Nothing. I walked over to the light switch, turned it on. The ceiling looked normal. No marks. No discoloration. Nothing that would explain it. I turned the light off again. The room went back to that dim gray. Still nothing. I checked the time again. 1:41. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I sat back down on the bed. Looked up again, half expecting to come back. It didn't. I stayed awake for a while after that, watching the ceiling. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I lay back down, closed my eyes, tried to sleep. The next morning, everything felt normal. I checked the ceiling in daylight, nothing there, no sign anything had been there at all. But now, when I lie in bed at night, I don't stare at the ceiling the same way. I catch myself checking the center of it, just to make sure that shadow isn't forming again. I noticed it because the road stopped feeling enclosed. I was driving back late, just after 1 a.m., taking a route that cuts through open countryside. It's one of those roads where the hedges are low and the land stretches out on both sides, so you can see a lot of sky when it's clear. That night was completely cloudless. Cold, still, nothing moving. The kind of sky where the stars look sharper than usual. I had the windows up, radio off, just driving in silence. There's a long straight section on that road where you can see a good distance ahead. My headlights were cutting a narrow path through the dark, everything outside that beam just fading into shadow. I'd driven that stretch 100 times. I knew how it should feel. That's why I noticed when it changed. At first it was subtle. The darkness ahead looked lighter. Not brighter like a light source, just thinner, like the air itself had lost some depth. I slowed slightly, leaning forward a bit over the wheel, trying to focus on it. The road was still there, the hedges, everything normal. But the sky looked different. The stars were sharper, too sharp, like they'd been brought closer. I don't mean bigger, just more defined, as if the space between me and them had reduced. I blinked a couple of times, thinking maybe my eyes were adjusting, but it didn't change. If anything, it became more noticeable. The darkness between the stars looked faded. Not gone, just less solid, like you could almost see through it. I slowed down more, the car rolling forward quietly. The usual sense of distance ahead felt off. The road didn't feel as long, the space didn't feel as deep. I glanced at the dashboard. Everything normal. Speed dropping slightly, engine steady. I looked back up. The sky ahead looked wrong. Flat, compressed. The stars held their positions, but the space around them didn't feel right. I swallowed. Felt a faint pressure in my ears, subtle, like a shift in altitude. I kept driving, slower now. My headlights reached out ahead, but the darkness beyond them felt reduced, like it was thinner than it should be. I had this strange sense that if I drove further into it, something would change. I don't know why, just a feeling. I checked the time on the dashboard, 1:12 a.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back up. The sky was still like that, sharp, close, unnatural. Then it shifted, not gradually, all at once. The darkness deepened again. The stars lost that sharp edge. The sense of distance snapped back, like something had been pulled over it or removed. I blinked, looked again. Everything was normal. The sky looked like it should. Deep, distant, untouchable. I slowed the car almost to a stop, heart rate picking up slightly. Not panic, just confusion. I looked around. The road was the same. Hedges, fields, nothing unusual. The air felt normal again. No pressure in my ears. I sat there for a few seconds, engine idling, just staring ahead, waiting to see if it would happen again. It didn't. I started driving again, slower than before, watching the sky carefully. Nothing changed, everything stayed normal, but the feeling didn't go away completely. That sense that something had been different, that the space ahead had shifted somehow. I drove another mile or so. Then I noticed something else. The sound. It had dropped slightly, not silent, just quieter than it should have been. I turned the radio on briefly just to check. It worked fine, clear, normal. I turned it off again. The quiet returned. I checked the time again, 1:14. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed. I kept driving, didn't stop again. The rest of the road felt normal. The sky stayed the same. Nothing else changed. I got home around 1:25, parked the car, sat there for a minute before getting out. Looked up at the sky again. Everything looked normal. Stars distant, darkness deep. Nothing unusual. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep. Didn't sleep much. The next night I drove that same road again, same time, same conditions, clear sky, cold. I paid more attention this time, watched the sky as I approached that stretch. Everything looked normal, no change, no thinning, no shift. I drove the entire length without seeing anything. But now, whenever I'm on that road at night, I catch myself watching the sky ahead, just to see if the darkness fades again, and if the stars ever look that close a second time. I noticed it because the light was too steady. I woke up in that half-aware way, not fully conscious yet, just aware that something in the room wasn't right. My eyes were still closed, but I could see that faint orange glow through my eyelids. At first, I thought it was morning, but it didn't feel like morning. The light wasn't shifting or spreading. It was just there. I opened my eyes. My phone was on the nightstand, screen lit up, facing me. That's what pulled me fully awake. I always put it face down before I go to sleep. It's just a habit I've had for years. I don't like the screen lighting up during the night, but it wasn't just face up. It was angled, like it had been turned slightly toward me. I pushed myself up onto one elbow and stared at it for a second. The screen was on, but not in a way I recognized. It wasn't showing notifications. Not the lock screen I normally see, just a dim, pale glow. No text, no icons, just light. I reached over and picked it up. The screen flickered for a moment, then went back to normal. Lock screen. Time, 3:18 a.m. I remember that clearly. I blinked, trying to wake myself up properly. Then I saw the battery. 4%. That didn't make sense. I'd plugged it in before going to bed. I always do. I looked at the cable, still plugged into the socket, the end of it lying on the nightstand, not connected to the phone. I frowned, trying to remember if I'd unplugged it. I didn't think I had. Even if I had, it shouldn't have drained that much. I checked the battery usage. Nothing unusual. No apps running. No activity that would explain it. I looked back at the screen. Everything normal now, like nothing had happened. I set it back down, this time face up. Watched it for a second. Nothing. Just the lock screen. I leaned back against the headboard, trying to think. Maybe I'd woken up earlier and used it without remembering. That happens sometimes, but the angle, the way it had been turned toward me, that didn't feel accidental. I looked around the room. Everything else looked normal. The door was closed. The curtains were still drawn. No movement, no sound. I lay back down slowly, staring at the ceiling. After a few seconds, I closed my eyes, and that's when I noticed something else, that faint glow. It was still there, behind my eyelids, not as strong as before, but present. I opened my eyes again. The room was dark. The phone screen had gone off. I picked it up again, tapped it. The lock screen came back, battery now at 3%. I checked the time, 3:19. I sat there for a minute, just holding it, trying to decide if I was overthinking it. Then I set it down again, face up this time, kept watching it. After a few seconds, the screen dimmed and turned off. Normal. I waited. Nothing happened. I lay back down again, closed my eyes. The faint glow was still there, pulsing slightly. Slow. I opened my eyes again. The room was dark, no glow. I sat up again, more alert now. Something wasn't lining up. I looked at the phone. Still dark, still on the nightstand, exactly where I'd left it. I checked the cable again, still unplugged. I reached over and plugged it in. The charging symbol appeared, normal. I set it back down. Watched it, nothing. Everything behaving as it should. I leaned back again, trying to settle. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd interrupted something, that the phone hadn't just turned on by itself, that something had been using it. I don't know why that thought came to me. It just did. I checked the time again, 3:22. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I stayed awake for a while after that, watching the phone, waiting for it to light up again. It didn't. Eventually I must have drifted off, because the next thing I remember was my alarm going off. Morning light through the curtains, everything normal. I picked up the phone, battery at 12%, still charging. I checked the battery usage again, still nothing unusual, no record of anything happening overnight. I even checked the screen time. No activity during those hours, nothing to suggest it had been used. I tried to recreate the angle it had been in. Set it the same way, but it wouldn't stay like that. It kept slipping flat. There's nothing on the nightstand that would hold it up like that. Now, every night before I go to sleep, I make sure it's face down, plugged in, exactly where it should be. But sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I don't reach for it straight away. I just look at it first to see if the screen's already on. I noticed it because the image bent in a way it shouldn't. I was checking the footage out of boredom more than anything. It had been a quiet week, nothing happening around the house, and I've got a habit of scrolling through the night recordings just to make sure everything's working. My name's Aaron. I live on a corner property, small place, nothing special. Two cameras outside, one facing the driveway, one covering the back garden and part of the fence line. That night, I was going through the back camera. Everything looked normal at first. Empty garden, fence still, no movement. The usual timestamp ticking in the corner. Then the image shifted. Not flickered, not glitched like when a signal drops. It warped, the whole frame. Like the air itself had rippled, the fence line bent slightly like it had been pulled sideways for a split second. The grass looked stretched. Even the corner of the shed roof curved in a way that didn't make sense. Then it snapped back. Instantly. I frowned and paused the footage, rewound it, played it again. Same thing, a quick distortion, then normal. I checked the timestamp, 2713. Then it jumped, 2718. 5 seconds gone, no transition, just missing. I leaned closer to the screen, replayed it again. The ripple happened right before the jump, like something had passed through the frame. Or the camera had caught something it wasn't supposed to. I checked the front camera. Same time, same distortion. The driveway warped slightly. The edge of the car looked like it bent. Then it snapped back. And again, the timestamp skipped forward 5 seconds. I sat back in the chair, trying to make sense of it. Could have been interference, some kind of signal issue, but both cameras at the same time? That didn't feel right. I went back a bit further in the footage. Everything normal. No glitches, no distortion. Just that one moment. I fast-forwarded. Nothing else. Completely normal. I checked the system logs. No errors, no signal drops, no alerts. Everything looked fine. That's when it started to bother me. I stood up, walked to the back door, and looked out into the garden. It was quiet, still, nothing unusual. I stepped outside. The air felt normal. Cool. No wind. I looked at the fence, the grass, the shed, everything exactly as it should be. I went back inside and watched the clip again. I paused it right at the moment of the distortion. The image looked wrong. Not just stretched, displaced, like parts of it had shifted out of alignment for a fraction of a second. I stared at it for a while, trying to see if anything was actually there, but there was nothing clear. No shape, no object. Just the effect. I decided to leave it. Figured it was some kind of glitch I didn't understand. Went to bed not long after. Didn't think much more about it until the next night. I woke up around the same time, no reason, just suddenly awake. I checked the time, 2:06. I lay there for a minute. Then I heard something. Not a sound exactly. More like a subtle shift in the air. Hard to describe. I sat up, listened. Nothing. I got out of bed and walked to the window. Looked out over the garden. Everything looked normal. Still. Quiet. I stayed there for a bit. Watching. Waiting. Nothing happened. Eventually, I went back to bed. Fell asleep again. The next morning, I checked the footage. Same time. 2:07. The image warped again. Same ripple, same distortion, same 5-second jump. I stared at the screen. Heart rate picking up slightly. I rewound it. Watched it again. This time I noticed something else. Right at the peak of the distortion, the center of the frame looked thinner. Like the space itself had been stretched. Not just the image, the actual scene. I couldn't explain it. I checked the front camera again. Same thing. The distortion lined up perfectly. Both cameras. Same moment, same effect, same missing time. I went outside again, looked at everything in daylight, nothing out of place, no damage, no signs anything had happened. That night I stayed up, sat in the living room with the live feed open on my phone, watching, waiting. 2:06 came around. Nothing. 2:07 I held my breath. The image stayed steady for a few seconds. Then it rippled, just like before. But this time I saw it live. The frame bent, the edges of objects shifted, and for a split second it looked like something was there. Not a shape, not clearly, just a section of the image that didn't match the rest, like it had depth where there shouldn't be any. Then it snapped back. The timestamp jumped. 5 seconds gone. I sat there, frozen, staring at the screen. The image returned to normal. Everything still, nothing moving. I didn't go outside this time. I just sat there, watching, waiting. Nothing else happened. The rest of the night passed normally. The next day, I checked the footage again. Same distortion, same missing time. It's happened a few more times since. Not every night, not even on a pattern I can follow, but always the same. A ripple in the image, a shift in the space. 5 seconds gone. I've tried to catch it from outside, standing in the garden around that time, watching the same area the cameras cover, but I've never seen anything directly, only through the footage. And now, every time I review it, I pause at that exact moment, just to see if the distortion looks any different or if one day there's something in it I can actually recognize. I noticed it because the water around it didn't react at all. I was out at a small reservoir just before dawn, one of those quiet places that only a few people use regularly. It sits a bit out of the way, surrounded by trees, with a narrow bank where you can set up and fish without much disturbance. I'd gone there early, around 5 a.m., because I like being there before anyone else shows up. It was cold that morning, a thin layer of mist hanging just above the surface of the water. Not thick enough to block your view, just enough to soften everything. The water itself was still, completely flat, no wind, no ripples. I'd been sitting there for maybe 20 minutes, line cast out, just watching the float drift slightly. Nothing unusual. No bites, no movement, just the quiet. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a reflection. A faint glow under the surface, a few feet out from where my line was. Dim, circular. I leaned forward slightly, trying to get a better look. It didn't move, didn't flicker, just sat there. I looked up at the sky, thinking maybe it was catching some light from above. But the sky was still dark, just starting to lighten at the horizon. There was nothing bright enough to reflect like that. I looked back down. The glow was still there, exactly where it had been. I shifted my position on the bank, leaning a bit to the side. The angle changed. The glow didn't. That's when I realized it wasn't a reflection. It was under the water. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. The surface above it was perfectly still. No ripples, no distortion. Just that faint, steady light beneath. I picked up my rod and reeled in slowly just to make sure my line wasn't interfering with it somehow. The float came back clean, no snag, no debris. I set the rod down again and leaned closer to the edge. The glow didn't react, didn't shift, didn't brighten, just stayed there. I could see the bottom of the reservoir in that area, faintly. It's not that deep near the bank, but the glow didn't seem to sit on the bottom. It wasn't casting any kind of shadow or illuminating anything around it. It just existed, contained. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like a change in air pressure. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I kept watching. The mist above the water moved slightly, drifting across the surface, but the glow stayed fixed. It didn't distort through the mist, didn't change when the surface shifted slightly. I leaned even closer, resting one hand on the ground to steady myself, trying to see if I could make out any shape. There wasn't one. Just a soft, circular patch of light. I stayed like that for a while, watching, waiting for it to do something. Anything. But it didn't. Then I noticed something else. The sound, or lack of it. The usual background noise had dropped. No birds, no distant movement, nothing. Just silence. I became more aware of my own breathing, the slight rustle of my jacket. Everything else felt muted. I glanced around briefly. The trees were still, the mist hung low, nothing out of place. I looked back at the water. The glow was still there, unchanged. I checked the time on my phone. 5:18 a.m. I remember that clearly. I put it back in my pocket, looked down again, and that's when it started to fade. Not quickly, slowly, evenly. The brightness reduced, but the shape stayed the same. It didn't move toward the surface, didn't drift, just dimmed. I leaned closer again, almost at the edge now. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed again, no change. The glow kept fading, still perfectly still, still contained, until it was barely visible, just a faint outline. And then, it was gone. No ripple, no disturbance. The water stayed flat, like nothing had ever been there. I stayed there for a few seconds, staring at the spot, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The silence held for a moment longer. Then, slowly, normal sounds returned. A bird somewhere in the distance, a faint breeze through the trees. The pressure in my ears eased. I sat back from the edge, hands slightly cold now from the damp ground. I checked the time again, 5:22. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I stayed there for another half hour, fishing, watching the water. Nothing else happened. No glow, no movement, just the usual stillness. I packed up eventually and headed home. Didn't mention it to anyone that day. Didn't really know how to explain it. A few days later, I went back to the same spot, same time, same conditions. I sat there, watched the water, waited. Nothing. The surface stayed flat. The bottom looked the same. No sign of anything unusual, but now, whenever I'm out there early in the morning, I find myself staring at that same patch of water, just to see if something shows up beneath it that doesn't move the way it should. I noticed it because it didn't stay where it should have. I was out in the garden, just lying back on one of those cheap reclining chairs, looking up at the sky. It was late, maybe just after 11. Clear night, no clouds, cold enough that you could see your breath if you exhaled slowly. I don't usually sit out there, but that night felt quiet in a good way. No wind, no traffic, just the kind of stillness that makes you want to stay a bit longer. I'd been staring up for a while, not really focusing on anything specific, just letting my eyes settle, picking out constellations I half recognize. That's when one of the stars moved. Not fast, not like a plane, just shifted, slightly, enough that it didn't line up with the others anymore. I blinked, thinking my eyes had drifted or something, looked away for a second, then back. It was back where it should be. I frowned, tried to find it again. Same spot, same brightness. Nothing unusual. I stayed still, watching that area of the sky, waiting. At first, nothing happened. The stars stayed fixed. Everything looked normal. Then, after maybe a minute, it happened again. The same star. It slid slightly to the side, not smoothly, more like a small, controlled adjustment. Then it stopped. I held my breath, watching, and then it snapped back. Instantly. No transition. Just back in its original position, like it had corrected itself. I sat up slightly in the chair, trying to get a better angle. The sky didn't change. Everything looked normal again. I told myself it was probably my eyes. That happens sometimes when you stare too long. Things drift, your focus shifts. But this didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, focused on that exact spot, trying not to blink too much. After a while, my eyes started to strain. I blinked, looked away briefly, then back. Still there. Same position, no movement. I leaned back again, relaxed a bit, tried to let my eyes adjust naturally. That's when I noticed something else. The silence. It had dropped. Not completely gone, just quieter than it should have been. No distant cars, no wind through the trees, nothing. I swallowed, felt a faint pressure in my ears, subtle, like a slight change in altitude. I looked back at the star. It stayed still, then it moved again. It moved again. This time a bit more noticeable. It drifted slightly downward, just a fraction, but enough that it broke the pattern of the stars around it. I sat up straight, watching closely. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. The star held its new position for a second, then snapped back. Same as before, perfect alignment, exactly where it had been. I stood up from the chair, stepped a bit further into the garden, looked up from a different angle. The sky looked normal, but I kept my eyes on that spot, waiting. The silence pressed in. I could hear my own breathing more clearly, my heartbeat too. Then the star moved again, this time sideways, a small shift, then still. I took a step forward without thinking. The moment I moved, it snapped back. I froze, stared at it. Nothing changed. Everything looked normal again. I stepped back. The grass under my feet felt colder than it should. I looked around briefly. The houses nearby were dark, no lights turning on, no movement. I looked back up. The star stayed still. I stayed there for a while, watching, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. After a few minutes, the silence started to lift. Faint sounds returned, a distant car, a slight rustle of leaves. The pressure in my ears eased. I checked the time on my phone, 11:52. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed. I stood there a bit longer, then went back inside, locked the door, didn't look up again. The next night, I went back out. Same time, same spot. Lay back in the chair again, watched the sky. Everything stayed normal. No movement, no shifting, just stars. Exactly where they should be. But now, when I look up at night, I don't just glance at the sky anymore. I pick a point, and I watch it, just to see if anything drifts out of place and then snaps back like it wasn't supposed to move at all. I noticed it because nothing around it lit up. I was driving back from a late shift, taking one of those long rural roads that cut through open farmland. It was just after midnight, maybe closer to 1. No streetlights, no houses close to the road, just fields on either side and the occasional fence line. My headlights were the only real light out there. Everything beyond them was just darkness. I'd been on that road for about 10 minutes when I saw it. At first, It looked like a faint glow off to the right, just past the edge of the field. Dim, low to the ground. I slowed slightly, trying to figure out what it was. It didn't look like a house light. Too low, too contained, and it wasn't lighting anything around it. That's what stood out. The ground near it stayed completely dark. No reflection, no spread. Just that small, soft glow sitting there. I eased off the accelerator a bit more, the car rolling forward quietly. The glow stayed in the same place relative to the field. Didn't move, didn't flicker. I glanced at the road ahead, then back toward it. Still there, same brightness, same position. I told myself it was probably something on the ground, a piece of equipment, a light from a farm building further back. But it didn't behave like light should. It didn't touch anything, didn't reveal any shapes, just existed. I slowed almost to a crawl, the headlights sweeping further along the road. The glow stayed just outside their reach. I leaned slightly toward the passenger side, trying to get a better angle. Still no detail, just a soft circular patch, hovering. I checked the time on the dashboard, 12:58. I remember that clearly. I looked back at the glow, and that's when it moved, not sideways, not drifting. Up, straight up, smooth, slow at first, then a bit faster. I froze, foot hovering over the brake, watching it. The glow lifted from the level of the field, rising into the air. Still not lighting anything around it, still just that contained shape. I pressed the brake lightly. The car slowed to a near stop. The glow kept rising. No sound, no change in brightness, just moving upward. I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep it in view through the windshield. The angle shifted as it climbed. The stars behind it stayed visible, unchanged. It didn't block them, didn't distort them, it just moved in front of them. Or maybe behind. I couldn't tell. I felt a faint pressure in my ears then, subtle, like a slight shift in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't go away. The glow kept rising, higher now, above the height of any trees or buildings. Still perfectly steady. No flicker, no pulse, just there. Then it began to fade, not quickly. Gradually, the same way it had been when I first saw it. Dim, contained, but now getting fainter. As it climbed, I kept watching, trying to hold on to it. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. The silence around me felt heavier. No wind, no distant sounds, just the engine idling quietly. The glow got smaller, not shrinking exactly, just harder to see, blending into the dark, until it was gone. No snap, no sudden disappearance, just faded completely. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the spot where it had been. Nothing, just empty sky. The stars looked normal again, unchanged. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The pressure in my ears eased. The quiet lifted slightly. I could hear faint sounds again, distant, normal. I checked the time, 1:02. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I looked back toward the field. Nothing there. No glow. No sign anything had been there at all. I waited for a minute, engine idling, watching. Nothing changed. Eventually, I pressed the accelerator and kept driving. Didn't stop again. Didn't look back. The rest of the road felt normal. The darkness behaved the way it should. My headlights lit the ground. Everything made sense again. I got home around 1:15, parked the car, sat there for a moment before getting out, looked up at the sky. Nothing unusual, no glow, no movement, just stars. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep, didn't sleep much. The next night I drove that same road again, same time, same conditions. I slowed down as I reached that stretch, looked out across the field. Nothing. No glow, no movement, everything normal. But now, every time I pass that spot, I find myself glancing out into the darkness, just to see if something's hovering there again that doesn't light anything. It should. I noticed it because the air stopped feeling normal. I was camping alone, just a short hike off a forest trail I'd used a few times before. Nothing remote, but far enough that you don't hear roads or see any lights once it gets dark. I'd set up just before sunset. Small tent, a little clearing between a few tall pines, nothing fancy. The ground was dry, weather had been steady all day. No rain, no wind, just that quiet you get in the woods when everything settles. By the time it got dark, I'd already eaten and was just sitting on a log near the fire pit, letting the last of the heat die out. I didn't keep a fire going long. I prefer the dark once my eyes adjust. It must have been around 10 or so. I remember checking my phone earlier and seeing no signal, which is normal out there. Everything felt calm. Not unnaturally quiet, just the usual forest sounds. leaves shifting occasionally, something moving far off, insects, nothing out of place. I was just sitting there, not really thinking about anything, when the air changed. At first, I thought it was the temperature dropping, but it wasn't cold. It was pressure, like the air got heavier. Subtle at first, just enough that I noticed my breathing felt slightly different. I took a deeper breath. It felt thicker. Not hard to breathe, just denser. I sat up straighter on the log, listening. The forest sounds had faded, not completely gone, just reduced. Like everything had taken a step back. I swallowed, felt a slight pressure in my ears. Same kind of feeling you get when you go up a hill too fast. I looked around the clearing. Nothing moved. The trees stood still. No wind, no rustling. The air just sat there, heavy. I stood up slowly. The ground felt normal under my feet. No vibration, no shift, just that weight in the air. I took a few steps toward the edge of the clearing. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting, a faint distortion between the trees. Not a shape, more like a shimmer, like heat rising off pavement. Except it was cold, and it was moving, slowly, between the trunks. I froze, watching it. The shimmer didn't have a clear edge. It just bent the space around it slightly. The trees behind it looked warped, like their outlines were being pulled out of alignment. It moved in a straight line, not drifting, not swaying, just sliding through the space between the trees. I held my breath without realizing. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. The air felt heavier still. The shimmer continued, crossing the edge of the clearing, closer now. I could see the distortion more clearly. It wasn't large, maybe the width of a person, but there was no solid form, just that bending effect. I took a step back. The leaves under my foot made a small sound, too loud in the silence. The shimmer didn't react, didn't change direction, just kept moving. I felt a tightness in my chest, not panic, just that creeping sense that something wasn't right. I stayed still, watching. The shimmer passed through the clearing, cutting across it in a straight line. The grass beneath it didn't move, didn't flatten, nothing physical changed, only the way it looked. The trees on the other side bent slightly as it passed in front of them. Then it reached the far edge of the clearing, slipped between two trees, and continued into the forest. The distortion grew fainter as it moved away. The pressure in the air held for a moment longer. Then it eased, slowly. The weight lifted. The pressure in my ears faded. The normal sounds returned. Insects first, then a distant rustle. The forest came back, like something had been holding it back. I stood there for a few seconds, not moving, just listening. Everything felt normal again. I looked toward where the shimmer had gone. Nothing, just trees, dark and still. I walked back to the log slowly, sat down, tried to process what I'd just seen. It didn't feel like anything I could explain. No sound, no light, just that distortion and the way the air had changed. I checked the time on my phone, 10:12. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed. I stayed up for a while after that, watching the trees, listening. Nothing else happened. Eventually, I went into the tent, zipped it up, lay down. But I didn't sleep much. Every small sound felt louder than it should. Every shift in the air made me pay attention. The next morning, everything looked normal. The clearing, the trees, nothing out of place. No marks, no signs anything had passed through. I packed up and left earlier than I'd planned. Didn't stay for breakfast. As I walked back to the trail, I kept glancing between the trees, half expecting to see that shimmer again. I didn't. But now, whenever I'm in the woods, I pay more attention to the air, not just what I can see, but how it feels, just in case it suddenly gets heavier again. I noticed it because it didn't sound like a sound. It started as a feeling. I was in the living room, just sitting on the couch with the TV on low. It was late, maybe around 11:30. Nothing unusual about the night. No bad weather, no noise outside, just a normal, quiet evening. At first, I thought I was getting a headache. There was this low hum, but it wasn't something I could point to. It didn't seem to come from the TV or any appliance. It felt like it was inside my head, like a vibration rather than a sound. I muted the TV, the hum stayed. I sat there for a second, waiting for it to pass. It didn't. It was steady. Low, almost like a tone, but not quite. More like pressure that had a frequency to it. I stood up slowly, walked over to the kitchen, checked the fridge. Sometimes it makes a low noise when it cycles on, but it was quiet. I opened it, closed it, no change. The hum stayed exactly the same. I moved into the hallway. It didn't get louder, didn't get quieter, just stayed with me. That's when I realized it wasn't coming from anywhere in the house. It was just there. I went upstairs, thought maybe it was something electrical, like a wire or a device I hadn't noticed. But every room felt the same. The hum didn't change, didn't shift direction, didn't respond to anything I did. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, trying to focus on it. The more I paid attention, the more it felt like it was inside my skull, not in my ears, deeper than that. I swallowed, felt a slight pressure like when your ears pop, but it didn't relieve anything. The hum stayed. I checked the time on my phone, 11:42. I remember that clearly. I put it back down, sat on the edge of the bed. The room felt quieter than usual. Not silent, just reduced, like something was dampening the normal background noise. I stood up again and walked back downstairs. The hum stayed with me the entire time, unchanged. I paused near the front door, stood still, listening, trying to figure out if it shifted at all. It didn't. Same tone, same pressure. That's when I decided to step outside, just to see if it changed. I unlocked the door and opened it. The moment I stepped out, it stopped, completely. No fade, no gradual drop, just gone. I stood there on the doorstep, blinking, listening. Nothing, just normal night sounds, a faint breeze, distant traffic. Life, everything felt normal again. The pressure in my head was gone. I stepped back inside. The hum returned instantly. Same intensity, same tone. I froze in the doorway, half inside, half out. Stepped out again. Gone. Stepped back in. There. I did it a few more times. Same result every time. Inside. Hum. Outside. Nothing. I closed the door, stood in the hallway. The hum felt slightly stronger now. Or maybe I was just more aware of it. I walked slowly through the house, room to room. It stayed with me. Constant. Unchanging. I checked the fuse box. Nothing tripped, everything normal. I unplugged a few things, TV, lamp, even the router. The hum didn't change. I went back upstairs, sat on the bed again, tried to ignore it. But once you notice something like that, you can't tune it out. It just sits there. Persistent. I lay back for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The hum stayed. Then I noticed something else. It wasn't perfectly steady. There was a slight variation, a rise and fall. Not rhythmic, just a subtle shift in intensity, like it was adjusting. I sat up again. The pressure in my ears returned slightly. I swallowed. No change. I checked the time again. 11:49. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed. I stood up again, went back to the front door, opened it, stepped outside. The hum vanished. Instant. Relief washed over me. The silence felt normal. I stood there for a minute, just breathing. Then I stepped back inside. The hum returned. Exactly the same. I stayed there in the doorway for a while, testing it. In, out, same result every time. Eventually, I stayed outside, sat on the step, didn't want to go back in. After a while, I went back inside again. The hum was still there, unchanged. I ended up sleeping on the couch downstairs with the front door slightly open. Not because I thought it would help, just because it felt better knowing I could step out if I needed to. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I remember was waking up in the morning, sunlight through the window, everything normal. I stood up, listened. No hum, no pressure, nothing. I walked through the house. Every room felt normal. I checked the time, 7:12. I checked my phone's battery, lower than it should have been, but not empty. No missed calls, no notifications, nothing unusual. That night, I waited, sat in the same spot, TV off, listening. Nothing happened, no hum. Everything stayed normal. But now, sometimes when I'm sitting in the house late at night, I find myself pausing, just listening, waiting to see if that low, steady vibration starts up again. And if it does, I already know stepping outside won't take long. I saw it before I realized how quiet everything had gotten. I was driving home late, taking a back road I don't normally use. It cuts through a stretch of farmland and dips into a low valley before climbing back out toward town. I only took it that night because the main road was closed. It was foggy, not thick enough to completely block your view, but enough that the headlights just sort of hung in the air, lighting up the mist more than the road itself. I was going slow, maybe 25 or 30, just because visibility wasn't great. The world felt reduced to whatever my headlights touched. Everything beyond that was just gray. That's when I saw the light. At first, I thought it was just the fog catching the beam in a weird way. A faint glow, low to the ground, maybe 20 or 30 feet ahead, but it didn't behave like fog. It held its shape. Small, soft, circular, maybe. I eased off the accelerator. The car slowed slightly. The glow stayed in place. It didn't shift with the angle of the headlights, didn't stretch or scatter. It just hovered there. I leaned forward a bit, trying to see through the fog. The road beneath it was barely visible, but the light didn't seem to come from the ground. It was just above it, floating. I remember thinking it might be someone's light. A torch or something dropped near the road. But there was no beam, no source, just that faint, contained glow. I slowed more, the car rolling forward quietly. The fog thickened slightly as I moved closer. The light stayed steady. Same brightness. Same position. I glanced at the edges of the road, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. Just fence lines disappearing into the mist. I kept moving forward, slow. Careful. The glow got closer. Still hovering just above the surface, still not lighting anything around it. That's what bothered me. It didn't reflect, didn't illuminate the road. Just existed. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like the air had shifted. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I checked the time on the dashboard, 1:17 a.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back up. The glow was maybe 10 feet ahead now, still steady, still unchanged. I took my foot off the accelerator completely. The car coasted. I didn't want to drive straight into it. I don't know why. Just instinct. The fog around it looked normal. No movement, no disturbance, just that patch of light sitting inside it. I came to a near stop, the engine idling softly. I stared at it, trying to understand what I was looking at. Then, it changed. Not suddenly, slowly. The edges of the light began to blur, like it was losing definition. I leaned forward again. The glow softened, spread slightly, but not outward. More like it was dissolving into the fog itself. The center stayed bright for a moment longer, then that faded too, until it was just gone. No movement, no drift, just gone. The fog remained unchanged. The road ahead looked the same as it had before. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the empty space where it had been. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. The silence lifted a bit. I could hear faint sounds again, distant, normal. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I checked the time again, 1:20. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I stayed there for a moment longer, then pressed the accelerator gently. The car moved forward, through the space where the light had been. Nothing happened. No change, no feeling, just fog and road. I kept driving, slow at first, then a bit faster as the fog started to thin. The rest of the road was uneventful. No more lights, no strange shapes, just the usual stretch of dark and mist. I got home around 1:35, parked the car, sat there for a minute before getting out, looking back down the road. Nothing visible, just darkness. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep. Didn't sleep much. A few nights later, I drove that same road again, foggy again, similar conditions. I slowed down as I reached that dip in the valley. Watched the road carefully. Nothing appeared. No glow, no movement. Everything looked normal. But now, whenever I drive through fog at night, I find myself watching the road just ahead of the headlights, waiting to see if something else forms out of it and then fades away like it was never really there. I woke up already sitting halfway upright. Not fully awake, just that sudden jolt where your body reacts before your mind catches up. My heart was already beating faster, like I'd just been startled, but I didn't know why yet. The room was dark, not completely, just the usual low light from outside bleeding through the curtains, enough to make out shapes, and I had this really clear feeling that someone had just been standing next to the bed. Close, right by my side. I didn't move at first, just sat there, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. I turned my head slowly toward that side of the room. The floor was empty. The chair in the corner was where it should be. The door was still closed. I stayed like that for a few seconds, trying to let the feeling pass. Sometimes you wake up from a dream and it lingers. That's what I told myself. But this didn't feel like a dream. It felt like I'd interrupted something. I swung my legs out of bed and stood up. The floor was cool under my feet. Normal. I walked over to the door and checked it. Still locked. I always lock it at night. I turned the handle slightly, just to be sure it didn't move. I let go and stood there for a second, listening again. Nothing. I turned back toward the bed. Everything looked the same, nothing out of place. That's when I noticed the window. It wasn't open, the curtains were drawn like I'd left them. But something about it felt off. I walked over slowly, reached out and touched the glass through the gap in the curtain. It felt warm. Not hot, just warmer than it should have been, especially for that time of night. I pulled the curtain back slightly. The window looked normal, no condensation, no marks, nothing on the outside that I could see. I pressed my palm against it again. Still warm. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. It hadn't been warm earlier. I would have noticed. I stepped back and looked around the room again. Everything else felt normal. The air wasn't warm. The walls felt the same. Just the window. I glanced at the bed. The covers were slightly disturbed, like I'd moved more than usual. But nothing else. No sign of anything being there. I checked the time on my phone, 2:53 a.m. I remember that clearly. I set it back down and stood there, trying to shake the feeling. That sense that someone had been standing right next to me. Close enough that I would have seen them if I'd opened my eyes a second earlier. I walked back to the bed and sat down. The mattress shifted under my weight. Normal. I looked at the spot beside where I'd been lying. Nothing. Just the indentation from where I'd been. I reached out and touched it. Still slightly warm, but that made sense. I'd been lying there. I leaned back slowly, not fully lying down, just resting on my elbows, looking up at the ceiling, trying to calm down. That's when I noticed the silence, not complete, but reduced, like the usual background noise had dropped slightly. No distant cars, no wind, nothing. I swallowed, felt a faint pressure in my ears, subtle, like a shift in the air. I sat up again. The room felt contained, like the space had tightened slightly. I looked back at the window, still closed, still warm. I stood up again and walked over, pressed my hand against it. The warmth hadn't faded. I opened it slightly. Cold air came in immediately. Normal, fresh. I leaned closer, looking outside. Nothing. Just the dark outline of the street. No movement, no lights. I closed the window again. The warmth stayed, like it was coming from the glass itself. I stepped back, waited. The pressure in my ears slowly eased. The silence lifted. Faint sounds returned. Distant. Normal. I checked the time again. 2:57. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I stood there for a while longer, watching the window, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I got back into bed. Didn't pull the covers up fully. Just lay there, staring at the ceiling. Listening. The room felt normal again. No pressure. No silence. Just the usual night sounds. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I remember was waking up in the morning. Sunlight through the curtains, everything looking normal. I got up and went straight to the window, touched the glass. Cold, like it should be. No warmth, no sign anything had been different. I checked the door again. Still locked, exactly how I'd left it. That night I made sure the window was closed tight, checked it twice, locked the door again, went to bed. I didn't wake up like that again. But now, sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up just enough to be aware of the room, and I find myself listening. Not for a sound, but for that feeling. Like someone might be standing right next to the bed again. Just out of sight. The power went out so suddenly it felt like something had cut the night in half. 1 second I was standing in the kitchen with the extractor fan humming, the fridge running, the usual background noise. Then everything just stopped. No flicker, no dimming, just off. The house went quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. I stood there for a second, waiting for something to kick back on. Nothing did. I checked the window over the sink. The streetlights outside were out too. The whole road looked darker than it should have been. My name's Lewis, and I live in a small coastal town. Power cuts happen sometimes when there's bad weather, but that night had been completely still. No wind, no rain, nothing that would explain it. I grabbed my phone off the counter and used the screen for light. No signal. That wasn't unusual during outages, but it still added to the feeling. I walked into the living room and looked out the front window. A couple of houses down, I saw someone step outside with a torch, waving it around like they were trying to figure out what happened. I thought about going out too, just to see if anyone knew anything, but something about how quiet it was made me hesitate. Not just the lack of electricity. The outside felt muted, like the usual nighttime sounds had dropped out completely. No distant cars, no wind off the water, Nothing. I stood there for a minute, listening. Then I noticed the sky. At first, I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the darkness, but there was something above the houses, a faint glow. I stepped closer to the window, looked up properly. The clouds were still there, low and flat like they usually are near the coast, but there was a shape in them, a ring. Not a perfect circle, but close enough that it stood out, a soft, pale glow outlining it. It didn't spread out into the rest of the cloud cover. It didn't move. It just sat there. I pushed the front door open and stepped outside. The air felt heavier than it should have. Not humid, just dense. I looked up again. The ring was clearer now, faint but defined, like something was lighting it from behind, but only along that shape. The rest of the sky stayed dark. A couple of other people were outside now. I saw a man across the road, Gary, I think his name is, standing in his driveway looking up as well. He didn't say anything, just stood there. Everyone seemed to be doing the same thing, looking up, not talking. The glow didn't change, didn't pulse, didn't drift with the clouds. It stayed fixed. That's what bothered me. The clouds themselves were barely moving, but they were moving enough that you'd expect the shape to shift with them. It didn't. It held its position exactly. I felt that pressure in my ears then, like a slow build similar to going up in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I glanced around. No one else seemed to react. They were just staring. I looked back up. The ring was still there, still glowing faintly, still perfectly still. I checked the time on my phone. 11:18 p.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back up again. The glow hadn't changed. It wasn't getting brighter or dimmer, just steady. The air felt quieter still. Like even the small movements, someone shifting a footstep, were softer than they should have been. I stood there longer than I expected, just watching, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. No movement, no sound, just that ring in the clouds. Then, slowly, it started to fade. Not outward, not spreading, just losing brightness. The shape stayed the same as it dimmed, like someone was turning down a light that was already on. I leaned back slightly, trying to see if it was dissolving into the clouds, but it wasn't. It was just fading. The edges softened, the glow weakened until it was barely visible, and then it was gone. The clouds looked normal again, flat, gray, unlit. I stood there for a few more seconds, waiting. Nothing came back. The pressure in my ears eased. The air felt lighter. The usual sounds started to return. A car somewhere in the distance, a faint breeze. Someone across the road cleared their throat. I looked over. Gary was still there, but now he looked confused, like he wasn't sure what he'd just seen. I checked the time again. 11:22. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed, or less. I couldn't tell. A few seconds later, the streetlights flicked back on, one by one. The houses lit up again. You could hear appliances restarting inside, the normal hum of everything returning. People started heading back indoors. No one said anything. No one asked questions. I stayed outside a little longer. Looking up, the sky looked completely normal. Nothing left of the ring. I went back inside eventually, closed the door. The house felt normal again. Sound returned, air felt right, everything as it should be. I checked the power box. Nothing tripped, no sign anything had happened inside. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept picturing that ring. Perfectly still, perfectly contained. A few days later, I asked Gary if he'd seen anything that night. He just shrugged, said the power went out, then came back. Didn't mention the sky. I didn't push it, but now, whenever there's a cloud cover at night, I find myself looking up longer than I used to, just to see if anything forms in it that doesn't move the way it should. I saw it because the angle of the headlights shifted for a second. I was driving back from a late shift, taking a narrow road that cuts through a stretch of woodland. It's not a road I use often, just when I want to avoid the main route. No streetlights, just trees on both sides and long bends that you can't really see through. It was around 1:30 a.m. Clear sky, no clouds, but the trees blocked most of it anyway. My headlights were doing most of the work, lighting up the road and the trunks ahead. I'd been driving in silence for a while. No radio, just the sound of the engine and the tires on the road. There's a part where the road dips slightly, then rises again. When you go up that incline, your headlights tilt upward for a moment before settling back down. I've driven enough to expect that. So when the lights angled up, I didn't think anything of it until they caught something. High above the road. For a split second, there was a reflection. Smooth, metallic, not bright like a sign or anything reflective on the road, more like a dull sheen, like light sliding across a curved surface. I barely had time to register it. Then it moved, not drifting, not falling. It tilted, like something rotating slightly. And then it was gone. No fade, no movement away. Just gone. The sky above snapped back to empty. I eased off the accelerator without thinking. The car slowed slightly. I glanced up again, trying to find it. Nothing. Just dark sky between the branches. I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind me. No headlights. No other cars. I looked forward again. The road looked normal. Trees, shadows, nothing out of place. I told myself it was probably something simple. A reflection off something I couldn't see clearly. Maybe a piece of metal caught in the branches. But it hadn't been in the trees. It had been above them. I kept driving, slower now. My eyes flicking upward more than they should, waiting for another glimpse. The road leveled out. The headlights returned to their normal angle. Everything ahead looked the same, but something felt off. The air felt quieter, not silent, just reduced. Like the space around me had dampened slightly. I swallowed, felt a faint pressure in my ears, subtle. I glanced up again. Nothing. Just darkness. Then the headlights flickered. Not off, just a slight dip. Then back to normal. I frowned, looked at the dashboard. No warning lights. Everything seemed fine. I looked up again, and for a split second, I saw it again. Further ahead this time. Higher. The same smooth metallic surface catching the light. It tilted again, like it had noticed the beam, and then gone. Instantly. I slowed down more, the car rolling forward quietly. I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep my eyes on the space above the road. Nothing. No shape. No movement. Just the sky. I felt that drop in my stomach then, that quiet realization that something wasn't lining up. I kept driving. Didn't stop. Didn't want to. The road curved slightly to the left. The trees thinned for a moment, opening up a wider view of the sky. I glanced up again. Nothing. But the darkness felt different, like it had depth in a way it hadn't before. Hard to explain. I focused back on the road, trying to stay grounded. Then I noticed something else. The sound. It had dropped. Not completely gone. Just quieter than it should have been. The engine sounded distant, muted. I turned the radio on briefly. It came through clearly. Normal. I turned it off again. The quiet returned. I checked the time on the dashboard, 1:34. I remember that clearly. I looked up again. Nothing. But I had this feeling, like something was still up there, just out of view, matching my movement. I kept driving, faster now, wanting to get out of that stretch. The trees started to thin again as the road approached a more open area. The sky became more visible. I glanced up one more time. Nothing, just stars. Everything looked normal. The sound returned. The pressure in my ears eased. The air felt right again. I exhaled slowly. Didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. I drove the rest of the way home without stopping. No more reflections, no more flickers. Nothing unusual. I got home around 1:45, parked the car, sat there for a minute before getting out, looked up at the sky above the street. Clear. Empty. No sign of anything. I went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep. Didn't sleep much. The next night, I took a different route home. Longer, but better lit. I haven't driven that road again since. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and the headlights catch something at the edge of the beam, I find myself looking up, expecting to see that same smooth surface tilt and disappear again. I noticed it because my ears popped like I'd just gone up a hill too fast. I was standing in the back garden, just outside the kitchen door. It was late, maybe around midnight. I'd stepped out to get some air because the house felt a bit stuffy. The weather had been warm all day, but by that point the air had cooled off. No wind, just still. I remember leaning against the wall, looking up at the sky without really thinking about anything. Then the pressure hit. Sudden. Sharp enough that I flinched slightly. Both ears at once. I swallowed instinctively, expecting it to clear. It didn't. The pressure held. Not painful, just wrong. Like the air around me had shifted without warning. I straightened up and looked around. The garden looked normal. Fence. Shed. Nothing moving. I glanced back toward the house, half expecting to hear something change inside. Everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. The usual background noise, distant traffic, the faint hum from inside felt reduced. Not gone. just lower. I swallowed again. Still no change. That's when I looked up properly. There was a small point of light in the sky. At first I thought it was just a star, but it wasn't in a place I recognized. I spent enough time outside to have a rough idea of what's usually where. This one stood out, dim, but steady. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to decide if I was just overthinking it. Then it moved, not fast, not like a plane, just a slow, steady drift. Across the sky, no blinking, no sound, just a single point of light moving in a straight line. I narrowed my eyes, trying to track it. It didn't flicker, didn't change brightness, just kept moving. The pressure in my ears stayed constant, like it was tied to whatever I was looking at. I shifted my weight slightly, stepping away from the wall. The grass under my feet felt normal. No vibration, no movement. I looked back up. The light had moved further along, still slow, still steady. I tried to listen for anything. A distant engine, wind, anything that would explain it. Nothing. The silence held. I checked the time on my phone, 12:08 a.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back up. The light was still there, still drifting. It didn't seem high enough to be a satellite, but it also didn't behave like anything closer. It didn't cast light, didn't reflect off anything. It was just there, moving. I felt a slight tightening in my chest then. Not panic, just that creeping sense that something wasn't lining up. I took a few steps forward into the garden, trying to get a clearer view. The light didn't react, didn't change direction, just kept drifting. Then, for a moment, it slowed. Not stopped, just slowed enough that I noticed the change. I held my breath without realizing, watching. The pressure in my ears increased slightly, like the air had thickened again. The light held that slower pace for a few seconds. Then it shifted. Not in direction, in position. It's hard to explain. It didn't move across the sky the way it had been. It just adjusted, like it had skipped a small distance forward. No blur, no motion. Just one moment it was here, the next it was slightly ahead. I blinked, stared harder, trying to convince myself I'd missed something. But I hadn't. The movement had been wrong. I swallowed again. The pressure didn't ease. I felt it deeper now, not just in my ears, in my head. Subtle, but there. The light continued drifting, same slow pace as before, like nothing had happened. I stayed there, watching it, not moving, not taking my eyes off it. After a while, it began to fade. Not quickly, just gradually losing brightness, still moving, still steady, but dimming until it was barely visible, and then gone. No flicker, no change in speed, just gone. I kept staring at the spot where it had been, waiting for it to reappear. Nothing did. The sky looked normal again, stars in their usual places, no movement. The pressure in my ears eased suddenly, like something had released. I exhaled slowly, didn't realize I'd been holding my breath again. The normal sounds returned, a car in the distance, a faint rustle from somewhere nearby. Everything felt right again. I checked the time, 12:12. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed, or less. I couldn't tell. I stayed outside for a bit longer, looking up, waiting. Nothing else appeared. Eventually I went back inside, closed the door. The house felt normal, the air felt normal, everything back to how it should be. But now, whenever I step outside at night, I find myself paying attention to the pressure in my ears first, before I even look at the sky. I felt it through the seat before I noticed anything else. I was parked in a nearly empty lot behind a row of closed shops. It was late, just after 11 p.m., and I'd pulled over to take a call because reception is better there than at my place. The call had already ended, but I stayed a few minutes longer, just sitting there scrolling through my phone. The engine was off, no music, windows up, everything quiet. That's when the vibration happened. Short, subtle. Like someone had tapped the underside of the car. It wasn't strong enough to move anything, just enough that I felt it through the seat and into my lower back. I sat up a bit, looked around. Nothing. No cars pulling in, no one walking nearby. The shops behind me were dark. The lot was empty except for one car way off near the far corner. I leaned forward slightly and put my hand on the steering wheel. Still. No vibration there, just the seat. I waited. Nothing else happened. I told myself it was probably the car settling, heat from the engine or something shifting underneath, but the engine had been off for a while. I picked up my phone again, looked at the time, 11:17. I remember that clearly. I was about to start the car and leave when I felt it again. Same vibration, same place, short, like a pulse. This time I froze. Didn't move, just sat there paying attention. The air inside the car felt different, not warmer, not colder, just still, like it had thickened slightly. I glanced at the rearview mirror without thinking. That's when I saw it, a faint glow, above the car, not bright, not enough to light anything up, just a soft, dim presence hovering somewhere overhead. I couldn't see a shape, just that glow lingering in the upper part of the mirror. I turned my head slowly and looked up through the windshield. Nothing, just dark sky. I looked back at the mirror. The glow was still there, same position, same faint intensity. I shifted slightly in my seat. The glow didn't move, didn't react, just stayed there. I felt that pressure in my ears then, subtle, like a slow build. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I kept my eyes on the mirror, trying to figure out if it was a reflection from somewhere else. But there were no lights nearby, no street lights above that section of the lot, nothing that could explain it. I reached up and adjusted the mirror slightly. The glow stayed in view. Still hovering above, not tied to any angle. That's when I realized it wasn't a reflection. It was something above the car. I leaned back slightly. The seat creaked under me. The glow didn't change. I listened. No sound, no hum, nothing. Just that quiet. I checked the side mirrors. Nothing there. Just darkness. I looked back at the rear view. The glow had shifted slightly, not moved across the sky, just adjusted, like it had repositioned itself slightly. I felt that tightness in my chest then, not panic, just awareness. Like something was there, and I wasn't supposed to notice it. I stayed still, watching, waiting. The glow lingered, unmoving now. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed again, still there. I reached for the door handle slowly, didn't open it, just held it. The metal felt normal, cold, real. I looked back at the mirror. The glow dimmed slightly, then held, then dimmed again. Slow, gradual, like it was fading. I leaned forward slightly, trying to keep it in view. The edges of the glow softened. It didn't spread, didn't move away, just lost brightness, until it was barely visible, and then gone. The mirror showed only darkness again. The pressure in my ears eased immediately. The air inside the car felt normal again. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the empty space, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. I checked the time, 11:21. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I looked around the lot again. Still empty, still quiet. The car in the far corner hadn't moved. No one else around. I started the engine. The sound felt louder than it should have, like everything had been dampened before and now it was back. I drove out of the lot without looking up again. Didn't want to. Just focused on the road ahead. When I got home, I sat in the driveway for a minute, looked in the mirror one more time. Nothing. Just my own reflection and the dark behind me. But now, sometimes when I'm sitting in the car at night, I catch myself checking the mirror before anything else, just to make sure there isn't something lingering above me again. I noticed the compass first because it didn't just wobble. It kept turning like it couldn't decide where north was. I was hiking a ridge trail I'd done a couple of times before, nothing extreme. Just a long stretch of elevated ground with a clear view on both sides. You could see miles out if the weather held up. That morning had started clear, but by the time I reached the higher part of the ridge, a thin layer of cloud had rolled in. Not thick fog, just enough to dull the distance and flatten the light. It was early afternoon, maybe around 2 p.m. I'd stopped for a break, sat on a flat rock, and pulled out my compass mostly out of habit. I like checking bearings even when the trail is obvious. At first it looked normal. The needle pointed north. Steady. Then it shifted, just slightly. I frowned and tilted it, thinking maybe I wasn't holding it level. The needle moved again, not snapping like it should, just drifting, slowly. I straightened it carefully in my hand, held it still. The needle kept moving, not spinning, just sliding a few degrees one way, then back, then slightly further the other direction, like it couldn't settle. I tapped the side lightly. Sometimes that helps if it sticks. It didn't change anything. The needle continued that slow, uncertain movement. I looked up from it. The ridge stretched out ahead, fading slightly into the haze. Everything looked normal. No movement. No reason for interference. I checked my phone. No signal. Not unusual. I switched it to compass mode. That spun too, more quickly than the physical one, like it was trying to correct itself but couldn't. I turned in place slowly. Both readings shifted, but not in a way that matched my movement. That's when I felt it. A faint pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, like a small change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I stood up from the rock, looked around more carefully. The air felt heavier, not thick, just weighted, like something had settled over the area. I slipped the compass back into my hand and held it out in front of me. The needle drifted again, further this time, then paused, then drifted back. I started walking along the ridge again, slow at first, watching the ground, then the compass, then the horizon, trying to figure out if I was just imagining it. The trail was still clear, easy to follow, but the compass kept pulling my attention. Every time I glanced down, it was pointing in somewhere slightly different, not wildly off enough to feel wrong. After a few minutes, I stopped again. The pressure in my ears had increased slightly. I swallowed again. Still there. The silence around me had changed too. The usual sounds, wind brushing across the ridge, distant birds, felt reduced. Not gone, just quieter than they should have been. I turned slowly, scanning the distance. That's when I saw it. Far out, beyond the ridgeline. A faint glow, low on the horizon, barely visible through the haze. I might have missed it if I hadn't been looking. It wasn't bright, just a soft, dim light. Small. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to figure out what it could be. A reflection? A distant building? But it didn't match anything I knew was out there. It sat there, steady, unmoving. I took a few steps forward along the trail. The glow stayed in place, didn't shift with my movement. I checked the compass again. The needle had drifted further now, pointing somewhere off to the side, not north, not anything consistent. I looked back at the glow. It pulsed once, not flashing, not blinking, just a single, soft increase in brightness, then back to normal. I felt my chest tighten slightly, that creeping feeling that something wasn't lining up. I stood there, watching, waiting to see if it would pulse again. It didn't. The glow stayed faint, steady. I checked the time on my phone, 2:17 p.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back up. The glow hadn't changed, but something else had. The air felt heavier again. The pressure in my ears deepened slightly. I shifted my stance, looked. A ridge felt off. Hard to explain, like the space around me had flattened slightly. The distance didn't look quite right. I looked down at the compass again. The needle had stopped, but it wasn't pointing anywhere that made sense. It just sat there, locked in a direction I knew wasn't north. I tapped it again. Nothing. No movement. I turned slowly in place. The needle didn't follow. It stayed fixed. That's when the glow faded, same way it had appeared. No movement, no change in position, just slowly losing brightness, until it was gone. I stood there for a few seconds, watching the empty space. The pressure in my ears eased slightly. The air felt lighter. The normal sounds started to return. Wind first, then distant movement. Everything slowly coming back. I looked down at the compass again. The needle shifted, snapped back toward north, steady, like nothing had happened. I checked the time again, 2:21. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed, or less. I couldn't tell. I stayed there for a bit longer, trying to decide if I should keep going or head back. Everything looked normal again. The trail was clear, the air felt right, but something about it stayed with me. I ended up finishing the hike. Didn't see anything else. The compass worked fine the rest of the way. No drifting, no issues. But now, whenever I'm out on a trail, I check the compass more often than I used to, just to make sure it still knows which way north is supposed to be. I noticed it because my shadow didn't match anything around me. I was walking home late, cutting through a quiet residential street I'd used plenty of times before. It wasn't completely empty, just the usual parked cars, houses with curtains drawn, the occasional porch light left on. It had rained earlier, so the pavement still had that slightly reflective sheen. The air was cool, not cold, and there was a light breeze that came and went. Nothing unusual. I had my hands in my pockets, just walking at a steady pace, not really paying attention to much. There was a street light ahead, one of those older ones that casts a soft yellow glow. As I got closer, my shadow stretched out in front of me like it normally does. Long, a bit distorted, nothing strange. I kept walking, and then it changed. Not gradually, just snapped. My shadow sharpened. The edges went from soft and blurry to clean and defined, like it had been cut out and placed on the ground. I slowed down slightly, looking at it more closely. It wasn't just sharper, it was darker, much darker than it should have been under that kind of light. Almost solid. I stopped walking. The shadow stopped with me, still sharp, still too dark. I glanced up at the streetlight. It looked normal, same dull yellow glow, no flickering, no change in brightness. I looked back down. The shadow didn't match it. It was too crisp, too defined. I shifted my weight slightly, just to see how it moved. The shadow followed, but there was something off about it. The movement felt delayed, not by much, just enough that I noticed it, like it was catching up to me instead of moving with me. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like the air had shifted again. I swallowed. It didn't go away. The breeze that had been moving through the street died completely. The leaves on the nearby trees stopped rustling. Everything felt still. I looked around. The houses were quiet, no movement in any windows, no sound. I looked back at my shadow. Still sharp, still dark. I took a step forward. The shadow followed, but again there was that slight delay, almost unnoticeable, but enough to make it feel wrong. I stopped again. The shadow settled, edges perfectly defined. I looked up, not at the streetlight this time, at the sky. There was a faint glow above, not directly over me, just somewhere higher up. Dim, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. It wasn't bright enough to light anything, but it was there. I lowered my gaze back to the ground. My shadow was still too sharp, too dark, not matching the light source. I took another step. Same thing, that slight lag, that unnatural crispness. I felt a tightening in my chest. Not panic, just awareness, like something wasn't lining up with how things should work. I stood still again. The shadow held, perfectly still, perfectly defined. Then the glow above dimmed, slowly, not moving, not shifting, just losing brightness. And as it did, my shadow softened, the edges blurred, the darkness faded back to normal, like someone had adjusted a setting I couldn't see. I watched it happen, gradually, until it looked exactly how it should under the streetlight. I looked up again. The faint glow was gone. The sky looked normal, just darkness and a few scattered clouds. The pressure in my ears eased. The breeze returned. Light at first, then steady. The leaves started moving again. The usual background noise crept back in. I stood there for a few seconds trying to make sense of it. Then I checked the time on my phone. 12:31 a.m. I remember that clearly. I put it back in my pocket, looked down one more time. My shadow looked normal. Soft edges, correct shape, no delay. I started walking again. The rest of the street felt the same as it always did. Nothing else changed. No more glows. No more strange movement. I got home a few minutes later, unlocked the door, went inside. Everything felt normal. But now, whenever I walk under streetlights at night, I find myself glancing down first, just to make sure my shadow is still moving the way it's supposed to. I noticed it because the light wasn't coming from the horizon. I was up early, earlier than usual. Couldn't sleep, so I made coffee and stepped out onto the back patio while it was still dark. It was one of those mornings where the air feels still, like everything's waiting for the day to start. My place sits just outside a small town, nothing but open fields behind the fence. You can usually see the sunrise clearly from there. I leaned against the railing, mug in my hand, watching the sky the way I always do when I'm up that early. At first, everything looked normal. Dark blue sky just starting to lighten slightly along the horizon, the usual gradual fade. Then I noticed something off to the left. A thin vertical strip of light. Not wide. Maybe the width of a couple of fingers held at arm's length. It stretched upward from the horizon, straight up into the sky. I frowned and shifted my stance, thinking maybe it was just a gap in the clouds catching early light. But there weren't really any clouds, just a light haze. And the strip didn't spread. It didn't soften. It stayed narrow, defined. I took a sip of coffee, still watching it. The rest of the sky continued to brighten slowly, the way it should. But that strip was already brighter, like it had skipped ahead. I stepped off the patio and walked a few paces into the yard, trying to get a clearer view. The grass was damp under my feet, the air cool. I looked back up. The strip hadn't moved, still vertical, still narrow. I checked the edges of it. They were too clean. Not sharp like a line drawn on paper, but cleaner than anything natural should look in the sky. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then. Subtle, like the kind you get when a storm's about to roll in. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I looked around briefly. Everything else felt normal. No wind, no movement, just that quiet, early morning stillness. I looked back up. The strip had brightened slightly, not dramatically, just enough that it stood out more against the rest of the sky. The horizon beneath it didn't look any different. No glow spreading outward, no gradual transition, just that one vertical section lighting up faster than everything else. I set my mug down on the railing behind me, stepped a little further out into the yard. I remember thinking it looked wrong in a way I couldn't explain, like something was lighting it from behind, but only in that one shape. I checked the time on my phone, 5:41 a.m. I remember that clearly. I put it back in my pocket and kept watching. The pressure in my ears deepened slightly. Not painful, just noticeable. The air felt heavier. I could hear less. The usual faint sounds of morning, birds, distant movement, felt muted, like they'd been turned down. I kept my eyes on the strip, waiting for it to spread or shift or do something that made sense. But it didn't. It just stayed there. Bright, narrow, vertical. Then it changed. Not suddenly, slowly. The brightness began to pull upward. That's the only way I can describe it. The lower part of the strip dimmed slightly, while the upper part stayed bright, like the light was retracting. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see it more clearly. The bottom edge faded first, then the middle. The brightness concentrated higher up. The strip got shorter, still vertical, still narrow, just shrinking upward. I felt that tightness in my chest then, that creeping awareness that something wasn't right. I didn't move, didn't look away. The strip continued to retract, higher and higher, until it was just a small segment near the upper part of the sky. Then that faded too, slowly, evenly, until it was gone. The sky returned to normal. The horizon looked the way it should. The light spread naturally across it, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a few seconds, still looking at the spot where the strip had been. The pressure in my ears eased. The air felt lighter. The usual sounds started to come back. A bird somewhere nearby, a faint rustle from the fields, everything returning to normal. I checked the time again. 5:45. That didn't feel right. It felt like more time had passed, or less. I couldn't tell. I picked up my mug and took another sip. The coffee had cooled more than it should have. I stood there for a while longer, watching the sunrise finish the way it always does. Nothing else changed. No more strange light, no movement, just the usual morning. But now, whenever I step outside before sunrise, I don't just look at the horizon anymore. I check the rest of the sky too, just in case something lights up where it shouldn't and then pulls itself back out of sight. I didn't even know anything had happened until my neighbor knocked on my door. It was late morning, just before 10. I was still in the kitchen making coffee, half awake, when I heard the knock. It wasn't loud, just quick and a bit uneven, like they weren't sure if they should be knocking at all. When I opened the door, it was Denise from 2 houses down. She doesn't usually come by unannounced, so I already knew something was off. She didn't say hello right away. Just stood there, looking at me like she was trying to figure out how to start. "Were you home last night?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Why?" She hesitated, then glanced past me into the house, like she expected to see something behind me. "I saw something over your house," she said. The way she said it wasn't dramatic, more confused than anything. I leaned against the doorframe. "Like what?" "I don't know," she said quickly. "That's the thing. It was just there, hovering. No noise, no movement." I waited. She kept talking, a bit faster now. "I was letting the dog out around," she paused, thinking, "just after midnight. And I looked up and there was this light, but not like a light. It didn't shine on anything. It was just sitting there above your roof." I felt a slight shift in my stomach, but I tried to keep it neutral. "How big?" I asked. "Not huge," she said, "but not small either. Bigger than a car, maybe. I couldn't tell exactly. It was just faint, like it didn't want to be seen." That phrasing stuck with me. "Did it move?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, that's what was weird. It just stayed there, completely still." "How long?" "I don't know," she said. "A minute? Maybe less." I went inside to get my phone, and when I came back, it was gone. She looked at me again. "You didn't hear anything?" I shook my head. "No." That wasn't a lie. I hadn't. We stood there for a second. She nodded slowly, like she wasn't expecting much else. "Okay," she said. "I just thought I should say something." I told her I'd check my cameras. She seemed relieved by that, then headed back toward her house. I closed the door and stood there for a bit, thinking. My cameras cover the front and back of the house. Not the roof directly, but enough of the sky that if something had been hovering, I should have seen something. I went to the living room and pulled up the footage on my laptop. Scrolled back to just after midnight. 12 nothing. The driveway was empty. The street was quiet. I skipped ahead. Still nothing. I kept going. 15. That's when it happened. A flicker. Not like a normal glitch. The image didn't break apart or freeze. It warped just slightly. The edges of the frame bent inward for a split second, like the whole scene had been pulled tighter. Then it snapped back. I paused it, rewound, played it again. Same thing. A quick distortion. Then normal. I checked the timestamp. Then it jumped. 12:09. 6 seconds missing. I frowned, switched to the back camera. Same time, same distortion, same jump. And closer to the screen, trying to see if anything else changed during that moment. But there was nothing clear. No object, no light, just that brief ripple. I played it again, slower this time, frame by frame. At the peak of the distortion, something felt off, not visible in a clear way. Just wrong. Like the space itself didn't line up properly. The fence looked slightly curved, the corner of the shed bent inward, then it all snapped back. I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen. I checked earlier footage, everything normal, no glitches, no distortion. I checked later, same, completely normal, just that one moment. I looked at the time again, 12:15. Denise had said just after midnight, that lined up. I went outside, walked around the front of the house, looked up at the roof, nothing unusual, no marks, no signs of anything. The sky was clear now, bright, normal. I walked around to the back, stood there for a bit, trying to picture something hovering above. But there was no reference, nothing to anchor it, just empty space. I went back inside and checked the footage again, paused on the distorted frame, zoomed in as much as I could, still nothing clear, but the feeling stayed. That something had been there, even if the camera hadn't captured it directly. That night, I stayed up later than usual, sat in the living room with the live feed open on my phone, watching, waiting. Nothing happened. Everything stayed normal. No flicker, no distortion, just the usual quiet. I checked the time around midnight. Nothing. 12:10. Nothing. 12:15. Still nothing. I kept watching. Eventually, I must have drifted off on the couch, because the next thing I remember was waking up around 3. Phone still in my hand, screen dark. I checked the footage the next morning, scrolled through that same time again, 12:15. The distortion was still there, the same 6 seconds missing, no change, no new detail. Just that brief moment where the image didn't behave the way it should. Denise hasn't brought it up again. I haven't either. But now, every night, just before I go to bed, I check that timestamp, just to see if anything else shows up in those missing seconds. I noticed it because the water stopped behaving like water. I was out early, just before sunrise, fishing along the edge of a reservoir a few miles outside town. It's a quiet place. Not many people go that early, especially during the week. I'd parked up, walked down the path, and set up near a shallow section where the bank slopes gently into the water. It was cold. Not freezing, but enough that your breath hangs for a second before disappearing. The surface of the water was mostly still, just small ripples moving across from a light breeze. I'd been there maybe half an hour, line in, not catching anything, just watching the water like you do. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, a faint glow under the surface, maybe 10 feet out from where I was sitting. But there wasn't anything above it to reflect. The sky was still dim, no direct sunlight yet, no lights around. Nothing that would cause that kind of glow. I leaned forward slightly, squinting. The glow was circular, not perfectly sharp, but clearly defined. A soft, pale light sitting just beneath the surface. The water above it didn't ripple. That's what stood out. Everywhere else, the surface moved slightly with the breeze, but directly over the glow, still, completely still, like that patch of water had been separated from the rest. I stood up slowly, walked closer to the edge. The glow didn't react, didn't shift, just stayed there. Same size, same brightness. I looked around, half expecting to see someone else nearby, maybe something in the water. Nothing, just me. The quiet felt heavier then, like the usual background noise had dropped off. I crouched down near the edge. The water was clear enough that you could usually see a bit beneath the surface. But here, it looked different. Not murky, just undefined. Like the glow wasn't coming from a specific depth, more like it existed within the water rather than under it. I reached out and dipped my fingers in. The surface broke normally. Cold water, no resistance. But the glow didn't change. It stayed exactly where it was. I moved my hand through it. Nothing. No warmth, no sensation, just water. I pulled my hand back out, watched the ripples spread. They stopped at the edge of the glow. Didn't pass through. That didn't make sense. I leaned closer. The glow remained steady. The edges didn't blur, didn't react to the movement. I felt a slight pressure in my ears then, subtle, like when you change altitude. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I sat back slightly, keeping my eyes on it. The glow didn't move, didn't pulse, just stayed there. I checked the time on my phone, 5:47 a.m. I remember that clearly. I looked back at the water. Still the same. Then, slowly, the glow began to shrink. Not fading, not dimming, just getting smaller. Evenly. Like the circle was tightening in on itself, the edges stayed defined, the brightness stayed the same, it just reduced in size. I leaned forward again, watching. The pressure in my ears increased slightly, the water above it remained still, completely separate from the rest of the surface. The circle got smaller and smaller, until it was only a few inches across. Then, it was gone. No fade, no ripple, nothing. The water returned to normal. Ripples moved across the surface where it had been, like nothing had ever been there. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the spot, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. The quiet lifted slightly. I could hear distant birds. The breeze felt normal again. I checked the time. 5:52. That didn't feel right. It had felt shorter. I stood up slowly, looked around again. Still no one else there. I reeled in the line without thinking. Didn't want to keep fishing. Packed my stuff up. But before I left, I walked along the edge of the water to where the glow had been. Stood there for a minute, just looking down. Nothing unusual, just water. I dropped a small stone into the spot. It sank normally. Ripples spread out evenly. No interruption. I left after that. Didn't stay any longer. The next day I went back. Same time, same spot. Water looked normal. No glow, no still patch. Just the usual surface movement. I stood there for a while watching. Nothing happened. But now, whenever I'm near water, I find myself looking a bit closer at the surface, just to see if there's a spot that isn't moving like it should. I felt it before I saw anything. Just a short vibration through the seat, like the car had idled unevenly for a second. Not strong enough to shake anything, just enough that I noticed it. I looked down at the dashboard. Engine was off, keys weren't even in the ignition. That's what made me sit up properly. I was parked in a lay-by just off a coastal road, about 10 minutes outside a place called Red Haven. Not a busy spot, just a gravel pull-in overlooking the water. I'd stopped there a few times before, mostly to clear my head after work. It was late, maybe around 11:40 p.m. The sky was clear, stars out, no moon. You could just about make out the line where the sea met the sky, but not much else. I'd been sitting there for a while, phone in my hand, not really paying attention to anything. Then the seat vibrated. Once. Brief. I held still. Waited. Nothing. I shifted slightly, thinking maybe I'd moved in a way that made the springs creak or something. Didn't feel the same. I leaned forward and turned the key halfway, just to check. Dashboard lit up. No issues. I turned it back off. Sat there again. A few seconds passed, then I felt it again. Same thing. A short, low vibration. Not from the engine. More like it came up through the floor. I frowned and glanced around. The car wasn't moving. The gravel outside was still. No wind, no passing cars. Nothing that could have caused it. I leaned forward again, this time resting my hand on the center console. Waited. Nothing. I sat back. Then, without thinking, I looked up at the rearview mirror. That's when I saw the glow. It wasn't behind me, not on the road. It was above, reflected faintly in the mirror. A soft light hanging somewhere overhead, not bright, just enough to stand out against the dark sky. I turned my head slightly, trying to look through the windshield. But I couldn't see it directly, only in the mirror. I adjusted it slightly. The glow stayed in view, faint, circular maybe. Hard to tell. It didn't have a clear edge, more like a patch of light. I sat there, staring at it. The vibrations stopped, completely. The car felt still again. I held my breath for a second, listening. Nothing, no sound at all. The glow didn't move, didn't flicker, just hovered there. I reached up and tilted the mirror again. The light stayed in roughly the same place. That's when it hit me. If it was something above the car, I should be able to see it directly. But when I looked up through the windshield, there was nothing, just stars. I leaned forward, craning my neck, trying to find the angle. Nothing. I leaned back again, looked at the mirror. The glow was still there. Same position, same brightness. I swallowed, felt a slight pressure in my ears. Subtle, like when you go through a tunnel. I shifted in the seat. The upholstery creaked normally, no vibration. I looked back at the mirror. The glow seemed closer, not physically lower, just more defined, like my eyes had adjusted to it. I reached up and touched the mirror, steadying it. The image didn't shake. The glow stayed fixed. I glanced down at my phone. Screen still on. Time read 11:43. I looked back up. The glow hadn't changed. I opened the door slowly, stepped out of the car. The night air felt normal, cool, still. I looked up directly above me. Nothing, just empty sky. I stepped back, leaned down slightly, and looked into the car again, through the rearview mirror. The glow was still there, exactly where it had been. That didn't make sense. I straightened up, looked at the sky again. Nothing. I bent down again, looked through the mirror. Still there. I stayed like that for a few seconds, shifting between the two. Direct view. Nothing. Mirror. The glow. I felt that pressure in my ears increase slightly. I stood up fully this time. Stepped away from the car, looked up. Nothing. I walked a few steps further back, then leaned in again. Checked the mirror. The glow was fainter now, still there, but dimmer. I got back into the driver's seat, closed the door, sat still. The glow remained, barely visible now. I watched it carefully. It didn't move, didn't shift, just slowly lost brightness, evenly, until it blended into the darkness, and then gone. I kept staring at the mirror. Nothing. Just the reflection of the back seat and the dark beyond. The pressure in my ears eased. The silence lifted slightly. I could hear the faint sound of the sea again. Distant. Normal. I checked the time. 11:49. That didn't feel right. It felt like less time had passed. I started the engine. The car came to life normally. No issues. No strange sounds. I sat there for another minute. Then pulled out and drove home. Didn't stop again. Didn't check the mirror. The next day I went back to that spot, parked in the same place, same angle, checked the mirror, nothing, just normal reflection. I even tried sitting there for a while, engine off, waiting. Nothing happened. But now every time I sit in that car at night, I catch myself glancing at the rearview mirror more than I should, just to see if that faint glow shows up again. I noticed it because I kept losing it. I was lying on the bonnet of my car out on this gravel pull-off near the moors, about 20 minutes outside town. It's one of those spots people use for dog walking during the day, but at night it's completely empty. No streetlights, no houses nearby, just open sky. It was cold, clear, no clouds at all. Perfect for stargazing. I'd gone out there a few times before with my friend Callum, but that night it was just me. I'd brought a blanket, a flask of coffee, and I was just lying there, letting my eyes adjust. After a while, you start to see more stars than you expect. The sky kind of fills in. I was just scanning across, picking out constellations I half recognized, when I noticed one star that didn't behave quite right. At first, I thought it was just my eyes. You know when you stare at something too long and it kind of drifts or flickers? It felt like that. But this one was different. Every time I moved my gaze slightly, it didn't move with the rest of the stars. It lagged, just a fraction of a second behind. I tested it a few times, thinking maybe I was imagining it. I'd look at a point slightly to the left, then quickly back to the star. Every other star shifted instantly with my vision. That one didn't. It sort of caught up, like it had to reappear in the right place. It was subtle. If I wasn't paying attention, I would have missed it. I sat up a bit, resting on my elbows, and focused on it properly. It wasn't brighter than the others. No color difference. Just a normal-looking star, except for that delay. I moved my head side to side, slowly. Same thing. Everything else stayed locked in place, but that one had this slight hesitation, like it wasn't part of the same sky. I remember saying out loud, "That's weird," even though no one was there. I took a sip of coffee and kept watching. After a minute or so, I noticed something else. It wasn't just lagging, it was drifting. Not across the sky like a satellite, just tiny movements, barely noticeable. But when I fixed my eyes on it, it didn't stay exactly where I expected. It kind of adjusted, like it was correcting itself. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe I was just tired, looked away for a bit, then back again. Still there, still off. I checked my phone to see if there were any satellites passing overhead. There's an app for that where Luft shows you what's moving. Nothing matched its position. I even checked for planes. Nothing. The sky was completely still, except for that one point. I lay back down, trying to relax and just observe it without overthinking. That's when I noticed the silence. It had crept in slowly, so I didn't catch it at first. Usually out there, you hear something. Wind, distant cars, maybe an owl. There was nothing. Not even the faint rustle of grass. I sat up again, listening. The world felt muted. Not totally silent, but like someone had turned the volume down. I looked around. The moor stretched out the same as always. Dark, flat, empty. My car was the only thing there. I checked the time. 11:41 p.m. I remember that because I checked it again later. I looked back at the star. It was still there. Still lagging. I decided to try something else. I got off the bonnet and stood up, walking a few steps away from the car. The gravel crunched under my shoes, but even that sounded duller than it should have. I looked back up. The star was in the same part of the sky, but now it seemed slightly brighter. Not by much, just enough that I noticed. I took another step. The brightness didn't change. I stopped moving, and that's when it shifted. Not drifting this time, a small, sudden movement, like it jumped slightly to the side. I blinked. It was back where it had been. I told myself it was my eyes again. Has to be. I walked back to the car and leaned against it, keeping my eyes on the sky. I didn't want to look away anymore. The longer I stared at it, the more that lag stood out. Every time I blinked, it felt like it took longer to come back into focus than everything else, like it had to reconnect. After a while, I started feeling uneasy. Not scared exactly, just that feeling you get when something's wrong but you can't explain why. I checked the time again. 11:41, same as before. That didn't make sense. I was sure at least 10 minutes had passed. I tapped my phone screen. The seconds ticked forward normally. 11:42. I stared at that for a second, then looked back up. The star was gone. I scanned the sky, trying to find it again. Everything looked normal. Every star in place. No lag, no drifting, just a regular sky. I stayed there for a while, trying to convince myself I'd just lost track of which one it was. But I knew roughly where it had been, and there was nothing there now. I packed up not long after that. Didn't feel like staying. As I got into the car, I had this weird sensation like I was being watched. Not from the ground, from above. I looked up one last time before getting in. Still nothing, just stars. I drove home. The whole drive felt off. The road seemed quieter than usual. Even the engine sounded different, like it was slightly out of sync with itself. I kept checking the time. It moved forward, but not in a way that felt consistent. I got home at 12:18. That didn't line up with when I'd left. It should have been earlier. I didn't think too hard about it. Just went inside, locked the door, tried to sleep. The next night, I went back. I told myself I wanted to prove it was nothing. Same spot, same setup, clear sky again. I lay on the bonnet, scanning the stars. It took a while, but I found it. Same position, same slight lag, like it had been waiting. I stared at it longer this time. Didn't move as much. Just kept my eyes fixed. After a minute or two, the lag stopped. It held steady like every other star. Perfectly in sync. That should have made me feel better. But it didn't, because then it started getting brighter, slowly. Not enough to stand out immediately, but enough that after a few seconds I couldn't ignore it. I sat up, watching it. The brightness increased just a little, then stopped, and in that moment I had this strange thought, that it wasn't getting brighter, it was getting closer. I stood up without thinking. The air felt heavy again. That same muted silence from before. I looked around quickly. Nothing on the ground. Nothing moving. When I looked back up, the star was gone again. Just like before. No fading, no movement, just gone. I didn't stay after that. Got in the car, drove straight home. I haven't been back since. But sometimes when I'm outside at night, I catch myself scanning the sky. And every now and then there's a star that takes just a fraction too long to settle into place when I look at it. and I don't stare at it anymore. I noticed it when I shifted my feet. I was standing near the middle of the boat, just adjusting my stance because the floor had started to feel colder through my boots. It was one of those quiet nights out on the reservoir. No wind, water like glass. You could hear every small movement. The creak of the boat, the line tapping against the rod. I'd been out there for maybe an hour already. No bites, but I didn't mind. I go out more for the quiet than anything. My name's Aaron, by the way. I usually fish alone, especially at night. Less hassle, no one talking. Anyway, I looked down when I shifted my feet, and that's when I saw it. A faint glow under the boat. Not bright, just enough to notice against the dark water. At first, I thought it was my headlamp, reflecting somehow. I had it around my neck, not switched on, but sometimes it catches light weirdly. So I turned it on and pointed it down. The glow didn't change. Still there. Soft, kind of white, but not really. More like a pale gray light, if that makes sense. I leaned over the side, trying to see better. The water was clear enough that night, but I couldn't make out anything beneath it. Just that glow, sitting under the boat. I straightened up and turned the lamp off again. The glow stayed. I told myself it was probably something in the water, maybe algae or some kind of reflection from the sky, even though there wasn't much moon. I picked up my rod again, tried to ignore it, but every few seconds I found myself looking down. It wasn't moving, just staying right under me. After a minute or two, I realized something else. The boat was drifting. Slowly, but it was moving. I could tell from the shoreline, the way the trees were shifting slightly in relation to me. But the glow, it stayed centered, right beneath the middle of the boat. I tested it. I stepped toward the front. The glow moved with me. Not instantly, just slightly delayed, like it had to catch up. I froze for a second, then stepped back. Same thing. It followed. That's when it stopped feeling like something natural. I grabbed my phone, thinking I'd record it. The screen lit up, reflected faintly on the water. But when I pointed the camera down, I couldn't see the glow properly, just darkness and a bit of reflection from the phone itself. I lowered the phone, looked with my eyes, still there. I tried again, nothing on the camera. That made me uneasy. I put the phone away and just stood there, watching. The glow didn't pulse or flicker. It was steady, and the longer I looked, the more it felt like it wasn't lighting the water. It was just existing in it, like it didn't interact with anything around it. I crouched down, bringing my face closer to the surface. The air felt colder near the water. I could hear a faint sound then, not from above, from below. A low, dull hum, barely there. I held my breath, trying to focus on it. It wasn't constant. It sort of came and went, like it was rising and falling slowly. I straightened up again, suddenly aware of how alone I was out there. No other boats, no lights on the shore nearby. Just me, and that glow. I reached for the oar and pushed against the water, trying to move the boat more deliberately. It slid sideways. The shoreline shifted faster this time, but the glow stayed with me. Still centered, still under the boat. That's when I noticed the temperature change. Not around me. In the water. Where the glow was, the surface looked slightly disturbed, not rippling, just different, like it was thicker somehow. I don't know how else to describe it. I leaned over again, watching closely. The glow seemed to deepen slightly, not brighter, just more defined, like it was coming from further below. The hum got stronger for a second, then faded again. I pulled back, suddenly not wanting to be that close to it. I sat down on the bench, keeping my eyes on the water, trying to think of something normal that could explain it. Nothing came to mind. I checked the time on my phone, 11:26 p.m. I remember that clearly because I checked it again later. I decided I'd just leave, pack up, head back to shore. I reeled in my line, hands moving slower than usual. Every now and then I'd glance down. Still there, still following. I picked up the oar again and started rowing properly this time. The boat moved forward, cutting through the water. The glow stayed with me, perfectly centered. It didn't lag this time, just stayed exactly under the boat no matter how I moved. That made it worse, because now it felt like it was tracking me. Not reacting, tracking. I rowed faster. The hum returned. Stronger now. Still low, but more noticeable. I could feel it faintly in my feet through the floor of the boat. I looked down again. The glow had changed slightly, not in brightness, in shape. It wasn't just a soft circle anymore. There was something uneven about it. Like parts of it were shifting within the light, not moving exactly, just rearranging. I stopped rowing for a second. The boat drifted, the glow stayed, the hum steadied. I felt that same heaviness in the air I felt a few times since, like everything was slightly out of sync. I didn't stay still for long. I started rowing again, harder this time. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I just wanted to get back to shore. The glow didn't fade, didn't change. It stayed with me the entire way, all the way until I was close enough to see the outline of the dock. That's when it shifted. Not suddenly, just moved slightly deeper, like it was sinking. The hum dropped with it, lower, fainter. I kept rowing, didn't slow down. As the boat scraped lightly against the edge of the dock, the glow dimmed, not fading out, just pulling away, like it was retreating into the water. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed my gear, stepped onto the dock, looked back once. The water was dark again, nothing there, no glow, no movement, just the reflection of the sky. I checked the time when I got to the car, 11:49. That didn't feel right. It should have taken longer to get back. I sat there for a minute, engine off, just listening. Everything sounded normal again. No hum, no pressure. I haven't been back out there at night since, but a couple of weeks later, I was there during the day. Same spot, same part of the water. And when I looked over the side, just for a second, I thought I saw something pale shift beneath the surface, right where the boat would have been. I noticed it because it stayed just out of reach. At first I thought it was coming from somewhere nearby. A generator maybe, or one of those electrical boxes you sometimes pass on quiet streets. It was that kind of sound. Low, steady, almost more felt than heard. I slowed down, trying to place it. It didn't get louder or quieter, just stayed the same. I kept walking. The sound stayed ahead of me. I was on a footpath that runs along a canal outside Warrington. It's not busy at night, especially not midweek, just a straight stretch of gravel path, water on one side, trees on the other. It was just after 10 p.m., cold, dry, no wind. I had my hands in my pockets, head down, not really paying attention until that hum cut through. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too, not faded, stopped. I stood there listening, nothing, no hum, no movement, just the usual quiet. Distant traffic somewhere far off, water barely shifting against the edge. I took a step forward. The hum came back, same tone, same level. I frowned, took another step, still there, always just ahead of me. I sped up a bit. The sound didn't change, didn't get closer, didn't move further away, just stayed in front. I slowed again, same thing. I stopped completely. Silence. I stood there for a second trying to process it. All right, I said under my breath. I started walking again. The hum returned immediately. It wasn't loud, but it sat right at the edge of hearing, like it was coming from somewhere just beyond where I could focus. I picked up my pace, walking faster now. The gravel crunched under my shoes, louder than the sound itself. The hum didn't change, didn't get closer. I started to feel that tightness in my chest. I stopped again. Silence. I turned around slowly, nothing behind me. The path stretched back the way I'd come, empty. I turned forward again, took one step. The hum came back, same place, ahead. I exhaled slowly. Just keep going, I said. I walked faster, not running, but close. The hum stayed in front. I couldn't catch it. No matter how fast I moved, it didn't drift further away either, just stayed that exact distance, like it was fixed. I slowed down again. The sound stayed steady. My ears started to feel that pressure again, subtle but building. I rubbed one ear slightly, didn't help. I glanced to the side toward the canal. The water looked black, flat, no reflection. That felt off too. Usually you get some shimmer, even at night. I looked back to the path. The hum continued. I took a few slower steps now. Testing it. The sound didn't react, didn't change, just stayed ahead. I stopped again. Silence. I stood there longer this time, trying to hear anything else. Nothing. I held my breath, still nothing. I took a step. The hum came back. Instant. I felt a slight shift in the air, like something moving just out of view. I stepped forward again. The sound moved with me, or stayed ahead. I couldn't tell. I looked straight ahead, focusing on the path, trying to see something, anything. There was nothing. Just the narrow stretch of gravel disappearing into darkness. The trees on either side felt closer than they should have been, leaning in slightly. I picked up my pace again. This time faster, almost jogging. The hum stayed, same distance, same tone. I couldn't close the gap. I stopped suddenly. Silence. I bent slightly, hands on my knees, catching my breath. The pressure in my ears eased. I straightened up, looked ahead. The path looked normal again. I took one step. The hum returned. I shook my head. "This is stupid," I muttered, but my voice sounded off. Flat, like it didn't carry properly. I started walking again. Steady pace. The hum followed or stayed ahead. I couldn't tell anymore. After a few minutes, I noticed something else. The sound wasn't just in front of me. It was slightly above. Not high, just elevated. Like it was coming from a point just ahead and slightly above my eye level. I looked up. Nothing. Just dark sky between the tree branches. I looked back down. The hum stayed. I took another step and another. Then I saw something. Barely. A slight distortion. Right at the edge of where the path disappeared into darkness, like the air was bending slightly. I slowed. The distortion stayed ahead, same distance. I stopped. It stopped. I took a step. It moved or stayed ahead, always just out of reach. My chest felt tight again. I took a deeper breath. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. The hum grew just a fraction stronger, not louder, just more present. I stepped forward again. The distortion became slightly more noticeable. Still faint, still hard to focus on, but definitely there. I kept walking. The hum stayed. The distortion stayed, always just ahead. I didn't try to catch up anymore. I just kept moving. After a while, the path opened up slightly. The trees thinned, the canal widened, and the sound stopped. Completely. I froze. Looked ahead. The distortion was gone. The path looked normal. The air felt normal. The pressure in my ears faded. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing. Just the usual quiet. I walked forward slowly. No hum, no distortion, just the path. I kept going until I reached the next bridge. There were streetlights there. Real light. I stepped under one. Looked back the way I'd come. The path disappeared into darkness again. Nothing moved, nothing followed. I stood there for a while, then turned and walked home. I didn't hear the hum again. But for the rest of the walk, I had this constant feeling that if I sped up just a little more, I might finally catch whatever had been just ahead of me. I was about halfway through the drive when my headlights dimmed. Not completely off, just dipped, like something passed in front of them for a second. The road ahead went darker than it should have been, like the beam got swallowed up. Then it snapped back to normal. I slowed down a bit, instinctively, even though there was nothing there. No car, no animal, nothing crossing the road. I was on a stretch of road outside Hexham, heading back toward Newcastle. It was late, around 1:30 a.m., and the weather had turned earlier. Light rain, not heavy, but enough to make the road shine under the headlights. There weren't many streetlights out there, just long gaps of dark between the occasional dim orange ones. I remember glancing at my dashboard, thinking maybe something flickered with the battery or the lights themselves. Everything looked fine, so I kept driving. About 30 seconds later, it happened again. This time it lasted longer. The headlights dimmed, and the road ahead didn't just get darker. It felt like it disappeared, like the beam stopped reaching as far as it should. I could still see the immediate road in front of me, but beyond that, it was just black. Not normal night darkness. Heavier. I slowed down more, easing my foot off the accelerator. "Come on," I muttered, like the car could hear me. Then it snapped back again. Full brightness. Wet road reflecting the light like normal. I exhaled and gave a small laugh, mostly to calm myself down. Electrical issue, I thought. Old car, weird wiring, something like that. Still, I didn't speed back up. A few minutes passed without anything happening. The road curved slightly, lined with trees on both sides. Their branches leaned over in places, forming these dark tunnels where even the weak streetlights didn't reach. I started to relax a bit. Then I noticed something else. The sound. The rain had been lightly tapping against the windshield the whole time. Not loud, just steady. But at some point, it stopped. I didn't notice exactly when. I only realized because the silence felt wrong. I flicked my eyes up at the windshield. The wipers were still moving, slow and steady, but there was nothing for them to clear. No droplets, no streaks. The glass was dry. I glanced at the side mirrors. The road behind me still looked wet. I could see the faint sheen under my taillights. But ahead of me, it was dry, completely. I felt that same tightness in my chest again. I pressed the accelerator a little, wanting to get out of that stretch of road. That's when the headlights dimmed a third time. This time they didn't come back right away. The beam shortened again, cutting off a few meters in front of the car. Everything beyond that was just gone. Like the road ended in darkness. I slowed almost to a crawl. My hands were tight on the wheel now. I leaned forward slightly, trying to see further ahead, like that would help. And then I saw it. Not clearly, just a shape. Something darker than the darkness, right at the edge of where the headlights stopped. It wasn't solid. Not like a person or an animal. More like a distortion, like heat rising off asphalt in the summer. Except it was night and cold. It stayed in place as I moved forward, or maybe I was moving toward it. I couldn't tell. The ringing in my ears started then, quiet at first, but noticeable. Same high-pitched tone you get from electronics sometimes, but there was nothing around. I eased my foot onto the brake. The car slowed even more. The shape didn't move. It didn't react. It just stayed there, right where the light ended. I felt this strong urge to stop completely. Not panic, not fear exactly, just this pull to not get any closer. But I was already too close. The car rolled forward another few feet. The headlights flickered, and for a split second, everything went completely dark. Not just ahead of me. Everything. No dashboard lights, no headlights, nothing. Just black. Then it all came back at once. The headlights were full brightness again. The dashboard lit up, the road stretched out ahead like normal, and the shape was gone. I hit the accelerator without thinking, pushing the car faster than I should have on a wet road, or what should have been a wet road. I glanced at the windshield again, still dry. The wipers kept moving uselessly, squeaking slightly now against the glass. I reached over and turned them off. The silence got heavier. No rain, no wiper noise, just the engine and that faint ringing, still there, just under everything. I checked the time, 1:47 a.m. That didn't seem right. I was sure it hadn't been that long since the first flicker. Maybe a few minutes, 10 at most. I tried to think back, to piece together how much time had actually passed, but it felt slippery. Like trying to remember a dream right after waking up. I kept driving. A few more minutes passed, and then I saw headlights coming toward me in the opposite lane. A car, finally. Relief hit me harder than I expected. As the car got closer, I slowed slightly, watching it. It looked normal, just a hatchback, nothing unusual. But as it passed me, something felt off. The driver didn't look at me, not in the usual way people glance as they pass. He just stared straight ahead, completely still. And his headlights, they dimmed as they passed my car, same way mine had. Just for a second, I checked my mirrors quickly. The car kept going, taillights steady, no sign of anything wrong. I turned my attention back to the road ahead. The rain started again. Light at first, then steady, tapping softly against the windshield. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Everything looked normal again. Wet road, full headlights, trees lining the sides. The ringing in my ears faded slowly until it was gone. I drove the rest of the way home without anything else happening. When I pulled into my driveway, I just sat there for a minute, engine running, staring at nothing. Eventually, I turned the car off and went inside. The next morning, I went back out to check the car. I don't know what I expected to find. Probably nothing. But when I looked at the headlights, I noticed something. Both of them had a faint smear across the glass. Not dirt, not water spots, just a thin, dull streak right across the center of each one. Same height, same position, like something had passed directly in front of them. The power went out without any warning. 1 second I was in the kitchen rinsing a mug, the next everything just dropped. Lights, fridge, the low hum of the house, all gone at once. It was already dark outside. Late evening, maybe around 9:30. The kind of damp, overcast night where the clouds sit low and you don't see any stars. I stood there for a second, hands still under the tap, waiting for something to click back on. Nothing did. Great, I muttered, turning the tap off. The silence settled in pretty quickly. Not total silence, there was still the faint sound of rain against the windows, but everything inside felt empty. I walked into the hallway and grabbed my phone off the table. No signal. That didn't happen often where I lived, just outside a small village near Durham. Usually, even during outages, the signal held. I frowned and held the phone up, like that might help. Still nothing. I turned on the flashlight and headed toward the front room. The beam felt narrow, like it wasn't reaching as far as it should. Probably just the darkness making it seem that way. I pulled the curtain back slightly and looked outside. The whole street was dark. No house lights, no street lamps, just silhouettes of cars and rooftops against the low clouds. I could hear a few distant voices, people stepping outside, calling to each other. I watched for a minute, then stepped back. The air inside felt cooler already without the heating. I decided to go out and check if anyone knew what was going on. I grabbed a jacket and stepped onto the front path. The rain was light but steady. A couple of neighbors were outside. Mrs. Clark from 2 doors down stood under her porch talking to someone across the street. "Power's out your side too?" she called. "Yeah," I said. "Any idea why?" "Not a clue. Must be the whole area." I nodded and stepped further out onto the pavement. The sky looked strange, not in a dramatic way, just heavier. The clouds were low, thick, but there was something about the way they sat that felt off. I glanced up again, longer this time. That's when I noticed the glow. It was faint, really faint, but it was there. A soft light behind the clouds, spreading out unevenly. At first I thought it might be the city, light pollution pushing through the cloud cover. But it didn't look like that. It wasn't orange. It was pale, almost white, but slightly off. I narrowed my eyes, trying to focus on it. The glow stayed steady for a few seconds. Then it shifted. Not across the sky, within the clouds, like something moving behind them, but without a clear shape. I took a step forward without realizing it. "Do you see that?" I asked, half turning toward Mrs. Clark. She looked up briefly. "See what?" "That light." She squinted for a moment, then shook her head. "Just clouds." I looked back up. The glow was still there, still faint, but more noticeable now that I was focused on it. The rain seemed to soften, not stop, just less. The street felt quieter. The voices faded. I realized I couldn't hear anyone talking anymore. I glanced around. People were still there. Mrs. Clark was still on her porch, but no one was speaking. Or if they were, I couldn't hear it. I turned back to the sky. The glow spread slightly, like it was filling more of the cloud cover. It didn't brighten, just expanded. The edges of it were soft, blending into the darker clouds around it. I felt that same pressure in my ears again, not painful, just noticeable, like being in a plane before your ears adjust. I swallowed. It didn't help. The glow shifted again. This time it seemed to move upward, not in a straight line, more like it was pulling away. The clouds above it thinned slightly, just enough to show a darker layer beyond. I stood there, watching, trying to understand what I was looking at. There was no shape, no clear source, just that pale light moving behind the cloud layer. Then it started to fade, slowly, evenly, like someone dimming it down. The pressure in my ears eased slightly as it did. The rain picked up again. I heard voices return. "Probably just the grid," someone was saying. I blinked. The glow was almost gone now, just a faint hint left in the clouds. Then it disappeared completely. The sky went back to its normal dark gray. A second later, the streetlights flickered on one by one. Then the houses, lights coming back through windows. A low hum returned as things powered up. I stood there for a second longer, looking up. Nothing unusual, just clouds. "Back on," Mrs. Clark called. "Yeah," I said, still staring at the sky. I went back inside. The house felt normal again, warm, familiar. I put my phone on the table. Signal bars came back immediately. I stood in the kitchen for a minute, replaying what I'd seen, trying to match it to something normal. Lightning, maybe, but it hadn't flashed, hadn't been sharp or sudden. It had moved, slowly. I shook my head and turned the kettle on. As it started to heat, I glanced out the window one more time. The clouds were still low, still thick, but there was no sign of that glow anymore, just darkness. I was doing late deliveries out past the edge of town, the kind of route where houses get further apart the deeper you go. Gravel roads, long driveways, no streetlights, just the occasional porch light cutting through the dark. It was just after 9:30 when I turned off the main road onto a narrower one that led out into farmland. The address I had was near the end of that stretch, one of those standalone houses set back from the road with a big yard around it. My GPS said I was about 5 minutes away. The van was quiet except for the engine and the occasional rattle from the shelves in the back. I had the radio on low, just for some background noise. As I got closer, the road got rougher. More gravel, more dips. I slowed down a bit, headlights bouncing off fences and the edges of fields. Then I saw the house. It sat off to the right, maybe 50 yards back from the road. Single story, wide front yard, a couple of trees near the driveway. There was a porch light on, warm yellow, and a faint light in one of the front windows. I checked the address again. It matched. I pulled into the driveway. Gravel crunched under the tires as I rolled forward. The headlights swept across the front of the house, lighting up the door, the windows, the small set of steps leading up to the porch. Everything looked normal. I put the van in park and reached over to grab the package from the passenger seat. That's when the lights went out. All of them. Porch light, window, everything. Just gone. I froze for a second, package in my hands. The headlights from the van were still on, lighting up the front of the house, but without the house lights, everything looked different. Flat. Empty. I waited. Sometimes people turn off lights when they're heading to bed, I thought. Maybe bad timing. I opened the door and stepped out. The air was cold, still. No wind at all. I closed the van door behind me and started walking toward the house. Gravel under my boots sounded louder than usual. Halfway up the driveway, I noticed the glow. It was above the roofline. Not directly overhead, but just beyond the peak of the house, maybe 10 or 15 feet above it. At first, I thought it was the moon, but it wasn't in the right position, and it wasn't that kind of light. It was pale, white, soft, but steady. I stopped walking. The glow didn't move. It just sat there, hovering above the house. The shadows in the yard stretched long and thin, angled away from it in a way that didn't quite match the direction it was coming from. I looked around. No other houses nearby, no vehicles, no sound. Even the usual night noise, crickets, distant cars, was gone, just silence. I took a few more steps forward. The closer I got, the more the light seemed to press down into the space around the house. Not brighter, just heavier. My ears popped. I swallowed, trying to clear it. The pressure stayed. I shifted the package in my hands. My fingers tingled slightly. At first, I thought it was from the cold, but it felt different, more even, like a low current running through them. I looked back at the van. It seemed further away than it should have been. Not by much, just enough to notice. I turned back to the house. The front door was still closed. No movement inside, no sign anyone had noticed me. The glow above the roof pulsed, once, soft, barely noticeable. The shadows in the yard shifted slightly with it. I felt it in my chest more than I saw it. A subtle pressure, in and out. I stopped again. Something about the way the light just hung there made me not want to get any closer. I stood there, trying to decide whether to keep going or turn back. The glow didn't change, it just stayed fixed. For a second, I thought I saw something within it. Not a shape, just a distortion, like the air was bending. I blinked. It looked the same as before. My ears popped again, sharper this time. I winced. The pressure built quickly, then held. The silence deepened. I realized I couldn't hear my own breathing properly. It sounded distant, muted. I looked at the front door again, still closed. No movement, no sign of anyone inside. I took a step back. The moment I did, the pressure eased slightly. I took another step back, then another. The glow stayed where it was, unchanged. I didn't turn around right away. I kept my eyes on it as I backed up toward the van. The gravel crunched under my boots, the sound slowly returning to normal. When I reached the van, I opened the door and got in. The interior felt normal, familiar. I set the package back on the seat, sat there for a second. Then I looked back at the house. The glow was gone. No fade, no movement, just gone. The house lights were still off. Everything looked dark and still. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. As I reached the road, I glanced in the mirror. The house was barely visible now, just a dark shape against the darker field behind it. No light, no movement. I drove for a while without thinking, just following the route. The radio came back on, the sound normal again. The air felt right. The pressure in my ears was gone. When I got to the next stop, I parked and sat there for a second before getting out. Something felt off. I checked the delivery app. The route log showed a gap from 9:42 to 10:22. No activity recorded, no movement, just a blank space between entries. I stared at it. There was no way I'd been sitting in that driveway for 40 minutes. It hadn't felt like more than a few. I looked back down the road. Nothing there, just darkness. I skipped that delivery, marked it as undeliverable, and moved on. Later, when I checked the address again, it was still in the system. Same house, same location, but Now, when I drive out that way, I slow down when I get near that road, and I don't turn in anymore. I was driving back from my sister's place just outside Hereford, heading toward a village called Weobley, where I rent a small cottage. It was just after 11 p.m., late October. One of those damp nights where the road stays slick even though it hasn't rained in hours. The hedgerows were thick on both sides, closing the road in so tight it felt like a tunnel in places. I'd taken that route plenty of times. It's a narrow B road, no streetlights, just reflectors and the occasional farmhouse set back behind gates. My headlights cut a clean path ahead, and everything beyond that dropped into black. I wasn't tired. I remember that clearly. Radio on low, heater humming, just focused on the bends in the road. About 15 minutes into the drive, I noticed the light. It was ahead, maybe 50 yards, just above the hedgerow on the left side. At first, I thought it was someone's porch light or a car coming up a driveway. But it was too high for that, and it wasn't moving. It hovered there, level with the top of the hedge, maybe 10 or 12 feet off the ground. White, but not harsh. Soft, almost like it had no edges. I slowed down instinctively. The road there narrows even more, barely enough space for 2 cars to pass. I figured maybe someone had stopped on the other side and the light was reflecting weirdly off something. But there were no headlights, no engine noise, no sign of another vehicle, just that light. I eased off the accelerator and let the car roll forward slowly. The beam from my headlights didn't seem to affect it at all. It didn't flare or dim. It just stayed constant, like it wasn't interacting with the rest of the world properly. Then I noticed the air. It felt heavy. Not like humidity, more like pressure. Like the inside of the car had thickened slightly. I swallowed and my ears popped faintly. The same feeling you get going up a hill too fast, except the road was flat. I rolled my shoulders, adjusted my grip on the wheel. The light hadn't moved. Still hovering above the hedge, dead still, as if it was waiting for something. I slowed even more, almost to a crawl now. There was a part of me that wanted to turn around, just reverse and take the longer route home. But the road was too narrow, and I didn't like the idea of backing up blind in the dark, so I kept going. As I got closer, maybe within 30 yards, the pressure increased. My ears popped again, sharper this time. There was a slight ringing underneath it, low and steady. Not loud enough to be a sound, more like a sensation. The steering wheel felt different in my hands, not heavier exactly, just less responsive, like there was a delay between what I was doing and what the car was doing. I glanced down at the dashboard. Everything looked normal. Speed dropping, fuel steady, no warning lights. When I looked back up, the light seemed closer. Not because it had moved, but because I had. Except I didn't remember covering the distance between where I'd been and where I was now. It was just nearer. Hovering directly over the hedge line, maybe 20 feet ahead. I could see more detail now. Not a shape, not really. But the air around it looked warped, like heat rising off asphalt, except it was cold out. The hedge beneath it was barely moving, even though there should have been at least some breeze. I slowed to almost a stop. The pressure in my ears peaked, sharp enough that I winced. I tried to swallow again, but it didn't help. My hands tingled slightly on the wheel. The ringing deepened. I remember thinking I should stop the car. Just pull over, figure out what I was looking at. I eased my foot toward the brake. And then, nothing. The next thing I knew, I was stopped. Engine idling. Hazard lights off, headlights still on. The road ahead was empty. No light, no distortion, just the hedgerow, dark and still. I was pulled slightly onto the verge, the left tires on damp grass, the right still on the tarmac. Not fully off the road, but enough that I must have steered deliberately. I sat there, hands still on the wheel, trying to piece together what had just happened. The engine sounded normal, the heater was still blowing warm air, the radio had switched to static. I turned it off. Silence filled the car, but it was normal silence now. Not that thick, pressurized quiet from before. I checked the time on the dashboard. 12:07. I stared at it for a second. I'd seen the light maybe 10 minutes after leaving my sister's place. The drive should have taken another 15 after that. There was no way I should have been there at 12:07. I reached for my phone. No signal. Battery fine. Clock matched the car. I sat there for a while, maybe a minute or two, just looking down the road. Nothing moved. Eventually, I pulled back onto the road and drove the rest of the way home. I kept expecting something else to happen. Another light, that same pressure in my ears, but the rest of the drive was normal. When I got home, I sat in the car for a bit longer before going inside. The engine ticked as it cooled. The night air felt lighter than it had on the road. I went to bed, but I didn't sleep much. The next day, I drove back down that same stretch in daylight. There was nothing there, just the hedgerow, thick and overgrown. No gaps, no driveways, no signs of anything that could have produced that kind of light. I even stopped the car and got out, stood right where I thought I'd seen it. The air felt normal, no pressure, no ringing. But I kept looking at the top of the hedge, trying to picture where the light had been. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't just lost time. I'd been... Pause just for a while. I noticed it because the road just stopped. Not physically, but the way my headlights hit it changed for a second. I'd been driving with full beams on, the road stretching out ahead the way it always does on those long, empty lanes. Hedgerows on both sides, nothing but fields beyond them. It was late, close to 1 a.m. No other cars, no houses nearby, just that narrow strip of road and whatever my headlights could reach. Then, for a split second, the light didn't go any further. It didn't bounce back, it didn't fade into the distance. It just ended, like something was there, blocking it completely. I instinctively eased off the accelerator, and that's when I saw it, not clearly. Just enough, a shape above the road, hanging there, perfectly still. It wasn't outlined, didn't catch the light. It absorbed it. That's the only way I can describe it. My headlights hit it, and instead of reflecting, the light just disappeared into it. No shine, no glare. Just a flat, dark surface that shouldn't have been visible at all, but was, because everything else around it was lit. I leaned forward slightly, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The edges were hard to define. Not blurry, just not there. Like my eyes couldn't settle on where it ended. I slowed down more, down to maybe 25. The shape stayed in the same position, above the road, too low to be anything like a plane, too high to be attached to anything. No wires, no structure, just hanging there. I rolled the window down a bit, cold air came in, no sound, no hum, nothing. The road ahead felt wrong, like it was cut off. I kept my eyes fixed on that space, trying to track the shape. The more I looked directly at it, the harder it was to see, but I could still feel it there, that absence of reflection, that gap in the light. I tapped the brake lightly, the car slowed further, the headlights shifted slightly as the angle changed. For a second, the surface became more noticeable, a smooth curve, not flat, not sharp, just a gentle, continuous shape. Then it moved, not across the road, not away from me, up, straight upward, no acceleration, no buildup. One moment it was there, then it wasn't. Gone. The headlights reached the road again. Normal. The space ahead filled back in like nothing had been there. I braked harder than I meant to. The car slowed to almost a stop. I stared through the windshield. Nothing. Just empty road. I opened the door and stepped out. The cold hit me immediately. The air felt still. Too still. I looked up. Nothing. Just sky. Dark, clear, empty. I turned slowly, scanning above me. There was no sign of anything. No movement. No light. No sound. I stood there for maybe 20 seconds, waiting, listening. Nothing changed. I got back into the car and shut the door. The inside felt quieter than before, like the sound hadn't fully returned yet. I looked at the dashboard. Everything normal. I checked the time. It didn't match. I glanced at it not long before. It had been around 12:52. Now it read 1:08. That didn't make sense. I hadn't been stopped that long. I tried to think back. The shape. The movement. It had taken seconds, not minutes. I sat there for a moment longer. Then I started driving again. Slow at first, then gradually picking up speed. The road ahead looked normal. The light reached as far as it should. Nothing blocked it. I kept glancing upward through the windshield. Nothing. No shapes, no gaps, just empty sky. The rest of the drive passed without anything unusual. When I got home, I parked and sat there with the engine off, looking out at the street. Everything felt normal again. The quiet sounded right, but the way that thing had taken the light, not reflected it, not cast a shadow, just removed it, stuck with me. It hadn't been dark like something unlit. It had been dark like the light didn't exist there at all. I noticed it because my ears popped like I'd just changed altitude. I was just standing outside, nothing unusual about it. It was late, maybe around half 11, and I'd stepped out into the back garden to take a call. The house was stuffy, and it was one of those nights where the air felt thick inside. Outside was better, cooler still, no wind. Clouds moving slowly across the sky, but high up, barely noticeable unless you actually looked for them. I just ended the call and stayed out there for a minute, leaning against the fence, not really thinking about anything. Then it happened. A sudden pressure shift. Both ears at once. That familiar pop, like when you're on a plane or going up a steep hill. I swallowed instinctively. It didn't clear. I frowned and tilted my head slightly, trying to equalize it. Nothing. The pressure stayed. Not painful. Just there. A dull, steady weight. I looked up without really meaning to. The clouds were still moving slowly, normal, but something was off. I couldn't place it at first. Then I saw the light. It wasn't bright, just a dim point, moving, gliding between the clouds, not through gaps, between them, like it was behind the clouds but still visible. I narrowed my eyes trying to focus on it. It didn't blink, didn't change brightness, just moved, slow, smooth, completely silent. I pushed myself off the fence and stood properly upright, watching it, trying to match it to something normal, a plane maybe, but there were no navigation lights, no blinking, and the movement was wrong, too steady, too controlled. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. I swallowed again. It still didn't clear. I took a step forward into the garden. The grass was damp under my feet. The sound of it felt muted somehow, like it wasn't carrying properly. I looked back up. The light continued its path, cutting between the clouds. It didn't illuminate them, didn't cast any glow, just existed against them. I tried to look directly at it. The moment I focused fully, it dimmed. Not gone, just harder to see. I shifted my gaze slightly to the side. It came back into clarity. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just something not lining up. I stood there, tracking it. The movement didn't change, didn't speed up or slow down, just continued. Then it stopped, midway across the sky, completely still. The pressure in my ears deepened. I felt it behind my eyes as well, subtle. But there, I held my breath without realizing it, watching, waiting. The light didn't flicker, didn't move, just held there. Then it shifted, not gradually, just changed direction from left to right, then upward, a slight angle, still silent. I felt a slight vibration in my chest, not a sound, more like a physical sensation. Then the light pulsed, once, very faint. At the same moment, the pressure in my ears peaked. A sharp, quick pop. Then it eased. I exhaled slowly, didn't realize I'd been holding it. The light continued moving upward now, faster than before. Not accelerating, just faster, like it had switched speed instantly. I tracked it as best I could. It grew smaller, fainter. Then it reached the edge of the cloud layer and was gone. No fade, no trail, just gone. The sky returned to normal. Clouds drifting slowly, nothing else. The pressure in my ears settled completely. The air felt normal again. The sounds came back. Distant traffic, a dog barking somewhere far off. I stood there for a moment, looking at the empty space, trying to understand what I'd seen. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. That was unusual. I always had signal in the garden. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been standing there for a couple of minutes. The phone said nearly 15 had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then the signal came back. Full bars. I looked back up one last time. The sky looked completely normal. Nothing out of place. But the way that pressure had come on, before I even saw the light, felt less like a reaction to something passing overhead, and more like something passing through the space I was standing in. I noticed it because the timestamp didn't line up. It was early morning when I checked the footage. I have a habit of scrolling through it while I drink coffee, just to make sure nothing weird happened overnight. It's a small setup, one camera pointed at the back garden, another at the front drive. Nothing ever really shows up. That morning started the same way. I scrubbed through the timeline, half paying attention. Empty yard, fence, shed. A bit of wind moving the plants. Normal. Then the screen went white, not faded, not overexposed gradually, just white, like the entire frame had been filled at once. It lasted for maybe a fraction of a second. Then everything went back to normal. I paused it, rewound, played it again, same thing. The yard was there, then a full white frame, then the yard again. I checked the timestamp. That's when I saw the gap. It jumped forward. Not by much, maybe 4 or 5 seconds, but it skipped. Cleanly. No intermediate frames. I leaned closer to the screen, rewound again, played it slower this time, frame by frame. The moment before the flash looked normal, then the white frame, then the next frame, the yard again. But something about it felt slightly off. I couldn't place it at first. I played it again. Then I noticed the angle looked slightly different, not dramatically, just enough that the fence line didn't sit exactly where it should, like the camera had shifted, but it hadn't. I checked the live feed, the camera was in the same place, same angle, nothing moved. I went back to the footage, played it again, the white frame, the skip, then the yard, still, quiet. I sat there for a minute staring at it. Then I checked the rest of the night. Everything else looked normal, no other flashes, no glitches, just that one moment. I got up and went to the back door, opened it slightly, looked out. The yard looked the same as it did in the footage. Fence, shed, nothing out of place. I stepped outside. The air was cool, still, no wind. I stood there for a second, trying to match what I was seeing to the footage. Nothing felt wrong, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened there, in that space. I went back inside and watched the clip again. This time I paid attention to the seconds before the flash. The plants were still, no movement. Then, right before the white frame, they shifted. Not from wind, more like a slight pull, as if something had passed over them. I replayed it, watched closely, same thing. A subtle movement. Then the flash, then the skip, then stillness again. I checked the timestamp once more. The gap was consistent, always the same jump. I scrubbed forward a bit. Everything after looked normal, until I noticed something else. The lighting. It didn't match perfectly. The yard looked slightly darker than it had before the flash. Not by much, just enough to notice. I leaned back in my chair, looked away from the screen for a second, then back. The image felt harder to focus on, like my eyes didn't want to settle on that part. I blinked a few times, then watched it again. White. Skip. Normal, but not quite. I checked the time on my phone. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for maybe 10 minutes. The phone said it had been closer to 25. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. Then I went back to the footage again, paused it on the frame right after the flash, zoomed in. The image broke apart slightly, pixelated, but something stood out near the center of the yard. A faint outline. Not clear, not defined, just a slight distortion, like the space itself hadn't settled properly yet. I leaned closer, tried to focus on it. The more I looked, the harder it was to see, like it slipped out of focus the moment I tried to define it. I sat back again, let my eyes relax. The shape seemed more visible when I wasn't looking directly at it. Then I looked at the timestamp again. That gap. Those missing seconds. I tried to imagine what could have caused it. A glitch, a power surge, something interfering with the camera. But none of that explained the way the frame went completely white, or the way the yard looked slightly different after. I stood up and went back to the door, opened it again, stepped outside. The yard looked normal. But the air felt slightly off, not colder, not warmer, just different, like there was less of it. I walked a few steps out, stopped roughly where that distortion had been in the footage. Nothing there, no marks, no signs of anything. I stood still, listening. The usual background noise felt muted, faint, distant. I looked up. The sky was clear. Nothing unusual. I looked back down at the ground, then around the yard. Everything looked exactly the same. But I couldn't shake the feeling that those missing seconds hadn't been empty. They just hadn't been recorded. And whatever filled them had left the space slightly out of place when it was done. The power went out while I was halfway through making tea. No flicker, no warning. Just everything cutting off at once. The lights, the kettle, even the faint hum from the fridge. I stood there for a second in the dark, hands still on the counter, waiting for it to come back. It didn't. I reached for my phone, turned the flashlight on, and stepped into the living room. The whole street was out. No porch lights, no street lights, nothing in any of the houses across from me. Just that dim gray outline of everything under the night sky. That part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the sky. I didn't notice it right away. I was looking for movement, cars, people, anything. But there was nothing. Then my eyes adjusted a bit more, and I looked up. There was a patch of cloud above the houses, slightly off to the right, and it was glowing. Faint, not bright enough to light anything below it, just a soft, dull brightness inside the cloud itself. I stepped closer to the window. The glow didn't come from behind the clouds. It wasn't like light from the ground reflecting upward. It was inside them, contained, like something behind the cloud layer was lighting it from within. I frowned and opened the front door. Cold air came in. Still. No wind. I stepped outside onto the pavement. The silence hit me first. Not just quiet, empty. No distant traffic, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. I looked up again. The glowing patch hadn't moved. It stayed in the same part of the sky, holding its shape. The edges weren't sharp, but they were defined enough to stand out from the rest of the clouds. I stood there for a few seconds, watching it. Then it changed. Not suddenly, slowly. The brightness increased just a little, enough that I could start to see more detail in the cloud itself. Faint layers, slight movement inside it, not like wind pushing it, more like something behind it shifting. I felt a pressure in my ears. Subtle at first, then more noticeable. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I took a step forward onto the street. The pressure increased slightly. I looked around. No one else outside. No doors opening. No voices. Just me. I looked back up. The glow pulsed. Once. A slow increase in brightness, then back down. At the same time, the pressure peaked, then eased slightly. I stood there trying to make sense of it. The rest of the sky stayed dark. Only that one patch glowed. I checked my phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual during a blackout, but it stood out. I looked back up. The glow shifted, not across the sky, just within itself. The brighter part moved slightly to one side, still contained in the same area. The edges adjusted, expanded a little, then pulled back. I felt that quiet tension settle in. Not fear, just confusion. I stepped back toward the house. The pressure eased again. I stopped, waited, then stepped forward again. It came back. I looked up. The glow was dimming now, slowly. The brightness reduced, the details inside it faded, the edges softened. I stood still, watching it. The pressure in my ears dropped, gradually. Within a few seconds, the glow was barely visible. Then it was gone. The clouds looked normal again, dark, flat. I stared at that spot for a few seconds longer, waiting. Nothing came back. And then, the power returned, all at once. Streetlights flicked on. Porch lights came back. I heard appliances inside the house start up again. The normal background noise rushed back in. It felt too loud after the silence. I blinked, looking around. Everything looked normal again. I checked my phone. Signal was back. Full bars. I looked at the time. It didn't match. I was sure the blackout had only lasted a few minutes. The phone said it had been closer to 20. I stood there for a bit longer, looking up at the sky. Nothing unusual. No glow. No movement. Just clouds, faintly lit now by the streetlights and distant town glow. I went back inside and shut the door. The house felt normal again, warm, familiar. But that patch of sky, the way it had lit up from inside, didn't feel like it had anything to do with the power going out. It just happened to end at the same time. I woke up already sitting halfway upright. I don't remember waking up gradually. 1 second I was asleep, the next I was alert, like something had just happened and I'd missed it. The room was dark, not pitch black. There was a faint bit of light from outside, enough to make out shapes. The dresser, the door, the edge of the chair in the corner. But the first thing I noticed wasn't what I saw. It was the feeling, like someone had just been in the room. Not in a vague way, specific. Close. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. No footsteps, no movement, nothing out of place. But the feeling didn't fade right away. It hung there, like I'd opened my eyes a second too late. I turned my head slowly toward the door. Closed. Exactly how I'd left it. I looked toward the corner. Nothing. The room looked normal. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up. The floor was cold. I walked to the door and opened it quietly. The hallway was dark and empty. I listened again. Nothing. No sounds from the rest of the house. I closed the door and leaned against it for a second, trying to shake that feeling. Then I noticed the air. It felt different. Not the whole room, just one part, near the window. I turned and looked. The curtains were still drawn, just slightly parted in the middle like I always leave them. I walked over slowly. The closer I got, the more noticeable it became. The air near the window was warmer, not by much, but enough that it stood out. The rest of the room was cool. That one area wasn't. I held my hand out, hovering just in front of the glass. There it was, a faint pocket of warmth. I moved my hand left. Cool. Right. Cool. Back to the center. Warm again. I frowned, trying to make sense of it. The heating had been off for hours. The window shouldn't have been warm. If anything, it should have been colder. I touched the glass. It felt normal. Cool. But the air just in front of it, that was warmer. Like something had been there, close to it. I stepped back slightly, looking at the curtains. They hadn't moved. No sign they'd been disturbed. I checked the latch. Still locked. I pulled the curtain aside a bit and looked out. The street was empty. No lights. No movement. Just the faint outline of parked cars and the road stretching out. I let the curtain fall back into place. Then I noticed something else. The room felt quieter than it should have. Not silent. Just muted, like the usual background noise was missing. I stood there for a minute, listening. Then, slowly, the normal sounds came back. Faint. Distant. The kind of things you don't notice until they're gone. I stepped away from the window. The air felt normal again. I walked around the room, checking everything. Nothing out of place. No signs of anyone being there. I went back to the bed and sat down. Checked my phone. 3:28 a.m. That seemed late, but not unreasonable. I didn't remember waking up before that. Didn't remember any noise or disturbance. I sat there for a bit, thinking. Then I looked back at the window. The warmth was fading. Still there, but less noticeable. I stood up and walked over again. Held my hand out, still warmer than the rest of the room, but cooling, gradually. I waited there, watching it change. After a minute or two, it felt normal again. No difference. Just the same cool air as everywhere else. I stepped back. The feeling that someone had been there started to fade too. Not completely gone, just less immediate. I went back to bed, lay down, staring at the ceiling. I didn't turn the lights on. I didn't feel like I needed to. The room looked the same, but I couldn't shake the sense that I'd missed something, like I'd woken up just after something had happened. Eventually, I closed my eyes again. Sleep came slowly. When I woke up in the morning, everything felt normal. The room looked the same, nothing out of place. I went over to the window, checked it again. The air felt cool, no warmth, no difference. I opened it and leaned out. The outside air felt normal too, nothing unusual. I closed it again. For a moment I just stood there, looking at the glass, trying to picture what it would have looked like from the other side. Then I noticed something small, a faint patch on the glass, barely visible, only at a certain angle, like a smudge. Not shaped like a hand, not anything clear, just an uneven area, right where the warmth had been. I touched it. The glass felt normal, cool. I wiped it with my sleeve. The mark faded, then disappeared. I stood there for a second longer, then stepped back. Everything looked exactly how it should. But that feeling that someone had been there didn't feel like it came from nothing. I stopped because the compass didn't make sense. It wasn't wildly off, just enough to catch my attention. I was hiking along a narrow ridge trail, the kind that runs with a drop on one side and a long slope on the other. It wasn't a difficult path, but it's easy to lose direction up there if you're not paying attention. I'd gone out later than I should have. The sun had already dipped low, leaving that dull orange light sitting along the horizon. Everything else was fading into blue. I pulled the compass out of my jacket pocket and held it flat in my hand. The needle drifted slightly to the right. I rotated my body, expecting it to settle properly. It didn't. It lagged, then stopped again, still off. I frowned and tapped the side of it lightly. Nothing changed. I held it further out, away from my body. Same result. The needle just sat there, a few degrees off where it should have been. I looked around, half expecting to see something obvious. Metal, power lines, anything that could interfere. There was nothing. Just rock, low grass, and a long stretch of sky ahead. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. That wasn't unusual up there, but I still noticed it. I looked back at the compass. The needle shifted again, slowly, not snapping into place, just drifting a little more, then stopping. I felt that quiet unease start to settle in, not panic, just that sense that something wasn't lining up. I put the compass back in my pocket and kept walking. The trail followed the ridge, curving slightly as it went. The light was fading faster now. The horizon ahead was darker, the last bit of orange thinning out. I walked for a couple of minutes, trying to ignore it. Then I pulled the compass out again. The needle was moving. not spinning, but not stable either. It drifted a few degrees, paused, then drifted again. Like it couldn't settle on a direction. I stopped walking, stood there for a second, watching it. Then I looked up. That's when I saw the glow. It was faint, just above the horizon, slightly to the left of where the sun had gone down. At first I thought it was just leftover light, but it wasn't spread out. It was contained. A small, dim patch. I stared at it, didn't move, didn't change shape, just sat there. Then it pulsed, once. A subtle increase in brightness, then back down. Not like lightning, not sharp or sudden, just a slow swell, then release. I felt something in my chest when it happened, not pain, just a brief pressure. I took a step back without thinking. The compass in my hand jerked slightly. Not a smooth movement, a quick shift. Then it stopped. The needle pointed somewhere I didn't expect. Not north, not anything that made sense with the terrain. I looked back up. The glow was still there, but dimmer now, fading into the dark. I stood there for a second longer, waiting for it to pulse again. It didn't. It just blended back into the horizon, like it had never been separate from it. I looked around the ridge. Everything looked the same. No movement, no sound. The wind had dropped completely. Even my footsteps felt quieter than they should have been. I checked the compass again. The needle had stopped moving, but it wasn't pointing north. I turned slowly, trying to recalibrate. It didn't follow correctly. It lagged behind my movement, then settled somewhere else entirely. I felt that tightness in my chest again, not fear, just confusion. I put the compass away and looked at the trail. Tried to rely on memory instead. The path ahead looked slightly different. Not dramatically, just enough that I hesitated. A rock I didn't remember. A slight bend that felt off. I turned and looked back the way I'd come. It didn't look quite right either. I stood there, trying to orient myself. Then I noticed something else. The light had dropped more than it should have. It felt later than it was. Darker. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. The time didn't make sense. It showed nearly an hour later than when I'd last checked. I stared at it for a second, trying to figure out if I just lost track of time. But it didn't feel like that long. I looked back toward the horizon. No glow. Just darkness now. I took a slow breath and started walking again. Carefully. Watching the ground, trying to follow the path as best as I could. After a few minutes, the terrain started to feel more familiar. The slope eased. The rocks looked like ones I remembered passing earlier. I kept moving, didn't stop again. Eventually, I reached the lower part of the trail where it widened out and led toward the tree line. I didn't feel that pressure anymore. The air felt normal. The sounds came back gradually, faint wind, distant movement in the trees. I stopped at the edge of the woods and pulled the compass out one more time. The needle pointed north. Steady. Exactly where it should have. I turned slowly. It followed perfectly. No lag, no drift. I stood there for a second, looking back up at the ridge. The horizon was just a dark line now. Nothing unusual. No glow, no movement. But something about it didn't sit right. The position of that light, when I tried to picture it later, didn't line up with where the sun had set. I only noticed it because I'd been staring at the same part of the sky for too long. It was one of those nights where you go out just to clear your head. I'd driven out past the last row of houses, parked near a field gate, and sat on the hood of my car with the engine off. No lights nearby, no noise, just the sky. I do that sometimes. Not for anything specific, just to sit and not think about anything for a while. After a bit, your eyes adjust and you start picking out the same patterns. I'm not into astronomy or anything, but I recognize a few shapes. That's what I was doing. Looking at one particular patch of sky just above the tree line. At first, everything looked normal. Stars steady, no movement, then one of them dimmed. Not disappeared, just softened. I frowned slightly, thinking maybe a thin cloud had passed over it, but the rest of the stars around it didn't change. Just that one. I kept looking. It brightened again. Back to where it had been, then dimmed, slow, even, like a steady rhythm. I sat up a bit, resting my elbows on my knees, focused on it. The moment I did, it stopped. Just a normal star again. No change. I blinked, thinking maybe I'd imagined it. I looked away for a second, then back. It stayed steady. I leaned back again, relaxing. Tried not to stare directly at it. Just watched the area. After a few seconds, it started again. That same slow dimming, then brightening. I felt that quiet tension start to build. Not fear, just confusion. I shifted slightly, trying to keep it in my peripheral vision. It kept pulsing, steady, like it wasn't random. I leaned forward again, focused on it directly. It stopped, completely stable. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. I looked away again, let my eyes drift across the sky, then back toward it. The pulsing resumed. I rubbed my face slightly, trying to stay grounded. Maybe it was something in my eyes or the way I was focusing, but it didn't feel like that. It felt separate, like it was doing it on its own. I checked my phone out of habit. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out. I looked back up. The star was pulsing again, slow, consistent. I decided to test it. I fixed my gaze just to the side of it, not directly on it. It kept pulsing. I shifted my eyes directly onto it. It stopped, perfectly steady. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, barely noticeable, like a change in air pressure. I swallowed. It didn't go away. I looked away again. The pulsing resumed. I felt my chest tighten slightly. Still not fear, just that sense that something wasn't lining up. I leaned back on the hood of the car again, tried to relax, watched the sky without focusing too hard. The pulsing continued. Then something else changed. The stars around it looked slightly off, not moving, just positioned differently. Like the pattern had shifted by a fraction. I blinked, focused on the area. Everything snapped back to normal. I looked away again. The pulsing continued. I checked the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only been sitting there for maybe 15 minutes. The phone said it had been nearly 40. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back up. The star was still pulsing, unchanged. I felt that pressure in my ears again, slightly stronger. Then I noticed something else. The air felt quieter, not silent, just muted, like the usual distant sounds had dropped out. I sat up slowly, looked around. Nothing had changed on the ground. The field was still, the road was empty. I looked back up. The star pulsed again. Then I focused on it directly. It stopped. I kept my gaze fixed on it this time, waiting. It didn't change, just a normal star. I held my focus there for maybe 10 seconds. Then I looked away. The moment I did, it resumed, that same steady rhythm. I stood up from the car. The metal creaked slightly under me, louder than it should have been. I kept my eyes on the sky, but not directly on that star. It kept pulsing. I felt the pressure in my ears peak, then ease. I looked directly at the star again. It stopped. I stayed there, staring at it, trying to force it to move. It didn't, just a fixed point of light. I looked away one last time. It pulsed again. Then slowly, it stopped on its own. Not because I looked at it. It just settled back into a normal, steady brightness. I waited, watched. Nothing changed. It stayed stable. I checked the time again. It didn't match. More time had passed than it should have. I stood there for a few seconds longer. Then I got back in the car, sat there with the engine off, looking up through the windshield. The sky looked normal, every star steady, no pulsing, no movement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't stopped because it was done. It had stopped because I'd noticed it. I noticed it because the fog didn't look right. It was one of those early morning drives, just before sunrise, when everything's quiet and the roads are empty. I was cutting through farmland to get to a job out near Wilmslow, taking the smaller roads to avoid the motorway. There was fog, but not heavy. Just low, patchy stuff sitting over the fields, drifting slowly across the road in places. My headlights cut through it fine. Nothing unusual at first. I had the radio low, barely paying attention, just following the road. Then I saw the glow. At first, I thought it was headlights from another car somewhere ahead, maybe dipping behind a hill or something. But it wasn't above the fog, it was under it. A soft light spreading across the ground beneath the mist. Not bright, just enough to make the fog look like it was lit from below. I slowed down slightly, trying to figure out where it was coming from. There were no buildings nearby, no houses, just open fields on both sides. The glow moved, slowly, but not with the fog. The fog was drifting left, pushed by a light breeze. The glow moved right, against it. I frowned, leaning forward slightly. The light didn't flicker, didn't change intensity, just glided under the fog like something moving beneath a surface. I eased off the accelerator, the car slowed, the headlights stretched further ahead. The glow became clearer. It wasn't a single point, more like a patch. Diffuse, soft-edged, but distinct from the darkness around it. I rolled the window down a bit. Cold air came in, damp, quiet, no sound, no engine, no hum, nothing. The glow kept moving. Still against the direction of the fog, I checked my mirrors out of habit. Nothing behind me. Empty road. I looked ahead again. The glow had shifted further across the field. Keeping a steady pace, I tapped the brake lightly. The car slowed to maybe 30. The glow didn't react, didn't change speed, just kept moving. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just something not lining up. I kept watching it, trying to match it to something real. Vehicle lights, machinery, anything. But there was nothing, no shapes, no silhouettes, just that soft light beneath the fog. Then it changed direction, not gradually, it just turned. The movement shifted from right to left, still under the fog, still smooth, still silent. I felt a slight pressure in my ears, subtle, like when you're driving up a hill. I swallowed. It didn't clear. I slowed down more, the car almost coasting now. The glow moved closer to the road, not directly toward me, just drifting in that direction. I gripped the steering wheel a bit tighter, watching it. The fog above it thickened slightly, or maybe it just looked that way because of the light. I couldn't tell. The pressure in my ears increased, a dull, steady weight. I checked my phone quickly. No signal. That wasn't unusual out there, but it stood out. I looked back at the field. The glow was closer now. Still no shape, still no source, just that light, moving. Then it stopped, right near the edge of the field, close to the road. I slowed to a near stop. The headlights illuminated the grass ahead, but the glow didn't reflect off anything. It didn't brighten the ground. It just existed beneath the fog. Separate. I stared at it, trying to force my eyes to see something more. Anything. Then it shifted again. Not across the field. Up. Not into the sky. Just up into the fog. The light rose slightly. The fog above it lit up for a moment. Then the glow faded, not quickly, just gradually, like it was being dimmed. The pressure in my ears eased, slowly. The fog returned to its normal dull gray. No light beneath it. Nothing moving. I sat there for a few seconds, engine idling, listening. The world felt quiet again, normal. I checked the time. It didn't match. I was sure I'd only slowed down for a minute, maybe 2. The clock said nearly 15 had passed. I frowned, trying to piece it together. Then I looked back at the field. Nothing, just fog, drifting with the wind. I pulled the car forward slowly. Drove past the spot. The headlights lit the ground normally. No glow, no movement, just empty field. But the way the light had moved, not with the fog, not with anything visible, felt less like something on the ground and more like something just beneath where I could see. I noticed it because the motion alert didn't make sense. It came through at 2:13 a.m., which already stood out because nothing ever triggered that late. I live on a quiet cul-de-sac, no foot traffic, no cars cutting through. The only things that usually set it off are cats or the occasional fox. I didn't check it right away. I was asleep. It was the next morning when I saw the notification sitting there on my phone. Just a generic alert from the front camera. No thumbnail preview, that was the first odd thing. Usually it shows a still frame. This one didn't. I tapped it. The app opened and buffered for a second longer than usual. Then the clip loaded. At first everything looked normal. The front garden, driveway, fence, street beyond, early morning darkness, slightly grainy. I watched it once, nothing happened, no movement, no person, no animal. I frowned and checked the timeline. The clip was shorter than usual, only about 6 seconds. Normally it records closer to 15. I scrubbed back to the start and played it again. This time, I noticed it. A distortion. Faint, moving across the frame, not a shape, not an object, just a ripple, like heat haze. But it was cold that night, near freezing. You could see the frost on the ground in the corners of the image. The distortion moved slowly from left to right, bending the image slightly as it passed. The fence line warped, the edges of the driveway shimmered. Then it reached the middle of the frame, and the video skipped. Not a glitchy stutter, a clean jump, one frame to the next. I paused it, checked the timestamp. There was a gap, 3 seconds missing. I rewound it again, watched carefully. The distortion entered from the left, moved steadily. Then, skip. It was suddenly further across, near the right side of the frame. Then it continued, fading as it went, until the image returned to normal. I sat there for a second, staring at the screen. Then I opened the back garden camera. Scrolled to the same time, same thing. A distortion, moving across, different angle but the same effect. The timestamp skipped there too. Not exactly the same amount, but close. I replayed both clips side by side. The distortions lined up, roughly the same movement, same direction, same speed. I zoomed in on the front camera footage. The distortion didn't have edges. It didn't block anything. It just bent the image, like something invisible passing through. I tried to enhance the brightness. It didn't help. If anything, it made it harder to see. The distortion blended into the noise. I leaned back in my chair, trying to think of what it could be. Heat shimmer didn't make sense. There was no heat source, no exhaust, no fire, and it was the middle of the night, cold, still. I checked the weather from that night. Clear, no wind, no temperature shifts, nothing unusual. I went back to the footage again. Paused it right before the skip, stared at the frame. The distortion was mid-frame. Subtle, but there. I stepped through frame by frame, watching how it moved. It didn't ripple like heat, it didn't flicker, it moved as one continuous thing. Then I hit the skip again, and something stood out. The position didn't match. It had jumped forward more than it should have in that time. I checked the timestamps again. 3 seconds missing. But the distortion had moved further than 3 seconds worth of motion. I replayed it, again and again. Same result every time. I stood up and went to the window. Looked out at the front garden. Everything looked normal. Fence, drive, nothing out of place. I stepped outside. The air was cold, still. I walked slowly across the same path the distortion had taken. From left to right, nothing happened. No change in the air, no sound. I stopped in the middle of the drive, looked toward the camera, then back toward the fence, trying to imagine what could have caused it. Nothing made sense. I went back inside, checked the footage again. This time I noticed something else. Right before the distortion entered the frame, the image shifted slightly. Not a full movement, just a tiny adjustment like the camera had recalibrated. Then the distortion appeared. I checked the back camera again. Same thing, a slight shift. Then the distortion. Then the skip. Then normal. I checked older footage, scrolled back through the previous nights. Nothing like it. Everything was stable, consistent. I sat there for a while longer, watching the clip loop, the distortion moving across, the time skipping. Then I noticed something else. In one of the frames, just before the skip, there was a faint shadow. Not cast on anything, just present. A darker patch within the distortion. I paused it, zoomed in. It broke apart into pixels. No clear shape, no detail. But it was there. I leaned closer to the screen, trying to hold on to it. The more I looked, the harder it was to see, like it didn't want to stay in focus. I sat back again. Then I looked at the timestamp, 2:13 a.m. I checked my phone's activity. I'd been asleep. No movement, no notifications, nothing. I checked the system logs for the cameras. They'd stayed online the whole time. No disconnects, no errors, just that one event. I watched the clip one last time. The distortion moved across the yard. The image bent. The timestamp jumped. Then everything returned to normal. But the thing that stayed with me was how the distortion didn't interact with anything. It didn't disturb the frost, didn't cast a shadow, didn't reflect light. It just passed through like whatever it was wasn't entirely in the same place as everything else. I noticed it because my breath shouldn't have been visible. It was warm out. Not hot, but warm enough that I'd been sitting around in just a t-shirt all evening. I was camping in a small patch of woodland just off a trail near Kinder Scout. Nothing too remote, but far enough that once it got dark, it felt properly isolated. I'd set up just before sunset, cooked something simple, sat by a small fire for a bit, then let it die down to embers. By the time I crawled into the tent, the air still felt mild. No chill, no reason for condensation or anything like that. I woke up sometime in the night, not suddenly, just drifted awake. The kind of wake up where nothing's wrong, but you're not asleep anymore either. I was lying on my back, looking up at the inside of the tent. It was quiet, too quiet. No wind through the trees, no insects, nothing. I lay there for a minute, listening. Then I exhaled and saw it, a faint cloud in front of my face. I blinked, exhaled again, another one, soft, visible breath, like it was cold. I frowned, pushing myself up onto my elbows. The air didn't feel cold, my skin wasn't reacting. No goosebumps, no chill. But every time I breathed out, I could see it. I reached out slightly, moving my hand through the space. The air felt normal. I sat up fully. The sleeping bag rustled softly. The sound felt muted somehow, like it wasn't carrying properly. I unzipped the tent slowly. The fabric made that low dragging sound. Again, it felt off, duller than it should have been. I opened the flap and leaned out. The woods were dark, no moon, just that faint ambient light that lets you see shapes but nothing clearly. I breathed out again, another cloud, clear as anything. I looked around. The trees stood still, no movement, no sound. That's when I saw the light. It wasn't bright, just a faint flicker. Between the trees, maybe 20 or 30 meters away. At first, I thought it was someone else, another camper. But it didn't behave like a torch or a fire. It flickered irregularly, not steady, not rhythmic, just appearing and fading. I stayed still, watching it. My breath continued to fog in front of me. Each exhale drifting slowly, lingering longer than it should have. I stepped out of the tent. The ground felt normal under my boots, dry, no frost, no damp. I looked down briefly. No mist near the ground, just around my breath. I looked back at the light. It was still there, faint, flickering, not moving, just present. I took a step forward. The leaves crunched slightly underfoot. The sound felt delayed, like it reached me a fraction too late. I stopped. Listen, nothing else. No animals, no wind, just that quiet. I took another step. The light flickered again, slightly brighter this time, then dimmer. I tried to focus on it directly. The moment I did, it seemed to weaken, like it slipped out of clarity. I looked slightly to the side. It became more visible again. I felt that quiet tension settle in, not fear, just something not lining up. I took another step forward. The breath in front of me grew thicker, more defined, like the air in front of me was colder than the rest. I reached out slowly. The air still felt warm on my skin, but my breath kept fogging. I looked back toward the tent briefly. It looked normal, still, silent. I turned back to the trees. The light flickered again, then shifted, not across the ground, just deeper between the trees, like it had moved back without actually traveling. I stepped forward again. The pressure in my ears started, subtle, like a change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The light flickered faster now, still faint, still not illuminating anything around it, just existing. I took one more step, then stopped. Something about the space ahead felt wrong, not visually, just the sense of it. Like the distance between me and the trees wasn't consistent. I stood there breathing slowly, watching the light, then it dimmed, gradually. The flicker slowed, the brightness dropped until it was barely there, then gone. No fade into darkness, just gone. The woods returned to normal, shapes, shadows, nothing else. I stood there for a moment, waiting, my breath still visible, still fogging in front of me. Then slowly, it stopped. The clouds grew thinner, fainter, until they were gone. I exhaled again. Nothing. Just normal air. The pressure in my ears eased. The sounds came back, faint at first, then clearer. Leaves shifting somewhere in the distance. A bird. The usual night noise. I stayed out there for a bit longer, looking at the spot where the light had been. Nothing returned. Eventually, I went back into the tent, zipped it up, lay down again. Everything felt normal. The air, the sounds, the space. But I didn't sleep much after that. Every now and then, I'd exhale slowly, just to check, half expecting to see it again, like the air in front of me wasn't always the same. I went up to the roof because I couldn't sleep. It wasn't anything unusual. The building had a small access door at the top of the stairwell, and most people didn't bother with it. But it wasn't locked, and sometimes I'd go up there just to get some air and clear my head. That night, it was just after 2 in the morning. I remember checking my phone before I left my flat, 2:08. The city was quiet in that late night way. Not silent, but reduced. Traffic was lighter, fewer voices, just the distant hum of everything still running. The roof was flat with a low concrete wall around the edge. A few vents, some pipes, nothing else. From up there, you could see down into the street on one side and across to other buildings on the other. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. The air felt cool, but still. No wind at all. I walked over to the edge and leaned slightly against the wall, looking out across the buildings. Lights in some windows, others dark. A few cars moving in the distance. Everything looked normal. I stayed there for a couple minutes, just standing, letting things settle. Then I noticed the light. It wasn't in the sky. It was between buildings, low, at about the same height as the rooftop I was standing on, maybe a little lower. It hovered in the gap between 2 apartment blocks across the street, maybe 50 or 60 feet away. At first, I thought it was a drone. That was my first assumption, but it didn't blink. No red or green lights, just a steady white glow, and it wasn't moving, not even slightly. I straightened up and focused on it. The light was round, or at least it looked that way. Not perfectly defined, but contained. It didn't spill out onto the walls around it the way a spotlight would. It just sat there. I leaned forward a bit, trying to get a better angle. Nothing changed, no movement, no sound. That's when I realized how quiet it had gotten. The usual background noise of the city was gone. No cars, no distant voices, no hum from air conditioners or traffic, just nothing. I shifted my weight and listened. Still nothing. I took a step back from the edge. The sound of my shoe on the concrete felt muted, like it didn't carry. I looked back at the light. It pulsed once, soft, barely noticeable, but I felt it. A slight pressure in my ears, like a quick change in altitude. I swallowed. It didn't clear. The air around me felt heavier, not thick enough to stop me breathing, just enough to notice. I rubbed my hands together. There was a faint tingling in my fingers. I looked back at the light. It hadn't moved. It just stayed fixed in that space between the buildings. I tried to look around it, see if there was anything behind it. The walls of the buildings were visible, but the light didn't seem to interact with them properly. It didn't cast shadows the way I expected. It didn't reflect normally. It was just there, separate. I took a few steps along the edge of the roof, trying to change my angle. The light stayed in the same relative position. No matter where I moved, it looked like it was facing me directly. That didn't make sense. I stopped. The pressure in my ears increased slightly. My chest felt tight, not panic, just a steady weight. I took a breath. It felt shallow, like the air wasn't moving the way it should. I looked back toward the stairwell door for a second. It felt further away than it should have. Not physically, just like it would take more effort to get there. I turned back to the light. For a second, I thought I saw something inside it. Not a clear shape, just a darker section, like something was passing through it or behind it. Then it was gone. The light returned to being uniform. My ears popped again, sharper this time. I winced. The silence deepened. It felt like everything had been pressed down, flattened. Even my own breathing sounded distant. I raised a hand slightly, like I was going to wave or block it. I don't know why. My arm felt slow, not heavy, just delayed. The light pulsed again, stronger. The pressure in my chest spiked. I sucked in a breath. For a second, everything felt out of sync, like my body wasn't keeping up with what I was seeing. I blinked, and suddenly I was standing near the door, not at the edge anymore. My back was almost against the wall beside it. My hand was on the handle. I froze. I didn't remember walking there. I turned around slowly. The edge of the roof was a few steps away now. The buildings across the street looked normal. The gap between them was empty. No light, no glow, just darkness. The sound came back all at once. Cars in the distance, a faint siren somewhere far off, the usual low hum of the city. I stood there for a second trying to catch up. My chest still felt tight, but it was easing. My breathing returned to normal. I looked down at my hands. The tingling was fading. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up. 3:19. I stared at it. That didn't make sense. I'd only been up there for a few minutes. It hadn't felt like more than 5 or 10. I checked again. 3:19. No missed notifications. No calls. Nothing that explained the time. I looked back out at the gap between the buildings. Nothing there, just empty space and dark windows. I opened the door and went back inside. The stairwell felt normal. The sound of my steps echoed again. Everything was back to how it should be. When I got back to my flat, I checked the time again. 3:21. It kept moving forward normally. But that stretch on the roof didn't line up with it, and now, sometimes when I step outside late at night, I find myself looking between buildings without meaning to, just to see if anything is sitting there where it shouldn't be. I walked that path most nights because it was the only place nearby that felt quiet after work. It followed the river for a couple miles, with a low metal rail between the path and the water. On the other side, trees and a few benches spaced out every so often. Nothing fancy, just enough light from the street lamps to see where you were going, and long dark stretches in between. That night it was colder than I expected. Not freezing, but close enough that my breath kept fogging up in front of me. The air felt damp, like it had rained earlier, even though the ground wasn't wet. I remember checking my phone before I started walking, 11:36. I had my hood up, hands in my pockets, just moving at a steady pace. No music, no calls, just the sound of my steps and the river off to the side. At first, everything was normal. The water had that constant movement, a soft, uneven sound as it passed over rocks and bends. Every now and then you'd hear a car somewhere in the distance. Then, without really noticing when it started, the sound of the river changed. It didn't stop. It just flattened, like someone had turned the volume down and smoothed it out. I slowed a little, listening. It didn't sound like water moving anymore, more like a steady hush without any variation. I kept walking. That's when I saw the light. It was ahead of me, maybe 20 or 30 feet down the path, off to the right over the water. Low, just above the surface. It wasn't bright like a flashlight or a headlight. It was softer than that, white but dull, like it wasn't fully lighting the space around it. I stopped. The light didn't move. It just hovered there. I stepped closer to the railing and leaned slightly, trying to get a better look. The water underneath it looked wrong. The current wasn't behaving the way it should. Upstream, I could see the usual ripples and movement. Downstream, too. But directly under the light, the surface looked almost flat. Not completely still, but close, like it was resisting movement. I frowned and leaned in a bit more. There was no splash, no disturbance, nothing touching the water. Just that glow, sitting there. I looked up and down the river. Nothing else like it. No reflection from a building, no overhead light, nothing that explained it. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure it out. Then the air shifted, subtle but noticeable. It felt heavier, like the space around me had thickened slightly. I took a breath. It didn't feel wrong exactly, just different. I straightened up and took a step back from the railing. The light pulsed, once, soft. The water beneath it seemed to tighten with it, like the surface pulled inward for a second. My chest tightened. Not sharp, just a steady pressure. I took another breath, deeper this time. It didn't help. My ears popped. Suddenly, I winced and swallowed. The pressure stayed. The rest of the world felt quieter now. The already muted sound of the river dropped even more. The distant noise from the road disappeared completely. I looked behind me. The path was empty. No one else walking, no movement. I turned back to the light. It seemed closer. Not physically closer, but more present, like it was occupying more of my attention without changing size. I took a step forward before I realized I was doing it. Then another. The pressure in my chest increased slightly. My hands tingled inside my pockets. I stopped walking. The light pulsed again, stronger this time. The water beneath it looked almost frozen for a second, not solid, just paused. My chest tightened sharply. I sucked in a breath. It felt shallow, like I couldn't fill my lungs properly. My vision narrowed slightly at the edges, not darkening, just less clear. I blinked. The light was still there, unmoving. The air around me felt dense, like pushing through something I couldn't see. I gripped the railing. The metal felt colder than it should have. For a second, I thought I saw something inside the light. Not a shape, just a darker section, like something passing behind it. Then it was gone. My ears popped again. Harder this time. The pressure in my chest peaked. I leaned forward slightly, trying to steady myself. Everything felt out of sync, like my body wasn't quite matching what I was seeing. I blinked, and I was standing somewhere else, further down the path, under one of the streetlights. I wasn't leaning on the railing anymore. I was upright, hands still in my pockets, facing forward like I'd been walking. I froze. It took a second for my brain to catch up. I turned around slowly. The spot where I'd been standing was behind me now. The section of railing, the bend in the river. No light, nothing unusual. Just dark water moving normally again. The sound of the river came back all at once, full, uneven, like it had before. I stood there trying to remember how I'd gotten from there to here. Nothing came, no sense of walking, no memory of moving, just a gap. I checked my phone, 12:12. I stared at it. That didn't line up. It hadn't felt like that much time had passed. I looked back at the river again. Still nothing. No glow. No change in the water. Everything looked completely normal. I walked back toward where I thought I'd been standing. Each step felt normal. No pressure. No heaviness. When I reached the railing, I stopped and looked down. The water moved like it always did. Ripples, current, small reflections from the distant lights. No sign anything had been there. I stood there for a minute, waiting to see if anything would happen again. Nothing did. Eventually, I turned and kept walking home. I checked my phone a few more times on the way. The time moved forward like it should. No jumps, no glitches. But I couldn't account for those missing minutes, or how I'd ended up further down the path without remembering it. Now, when I pass that stretch of river at night, I don't stop anymore. I keep walking, even if something catches my eye out over the water.